The only daughter of Saint Bianca and the war hero Zakir, Duchess Alexandra of Arno, died. The only person who understood him, and the one he secretly loved for so long. Young Alexandra took off her chain and, taking Sirius's hand, placed the jewelry into it. She asked her friend not to worry and promised to definitely return to His Majesty alive. Covering Sirius's hand with hers, the girl asked him to return the necklace to her when she returned. The young man was on the verge of despair and, not wanting to let his love go to certain death, pressed the necklace to his heart. Alexandra smiled at him, worried, as if reassuring his younger brother, if only he knew that this would be their last conversation. Then he would at least once confess his feelings, which he had hidden for so long, that he loved her, Alexandra, very much. But the servants came to His Majesty with sad news. Duchess Alexandra de Arno, the girl who led the vanguard, was killed. Sirius's hands trembled as he clutched the necklace. The day he heard about Alexandra's sad death was his 15th birthday. He realized that it was not the war that killed her, but him. The weak king, who had no ally, was left completely alone. He couldn't say a word against it, was forced to send her to the battlefield. The subordinates rebelled, and the king could only break free and shout, "How dare they do this?" The young boy's strength was not enough to overcome two grown men. The crown flew off his head and rolled to the feet of the third. The poor man, looming over him in a frightening tone, asked the man if he still thought he was a king. From the very moment Alexandra, once Duchess Arno, left him, Sirius became nothing but cattle awaiting slaughter. He poured the poisoned wine right into the young man's mouth. Was he really going to die like this? The fireball burned his mouth and throat. Soon it began to rage in his stomach, and Sirius was floundering in pain he could never have imagined. This is how he will die. Painfully, terribly. Did his beloved feel the same? If only he knew what death was, he would protect her at any cost, Alexandra. The story of my acquaintance with her began a long time ago, with a forest hunt for a rabbit. However, no matter how hard the girl tried, her arrow missed, only frightening the animal. Unfortunately, I missed it. It was a pity, because he was so handsome. The girl raised the arrow. Suddenly the wind rose, quite strong for the dense forest. But it was thanks to him that the girl saw something unusual lying behind the bushes. He turned out to be a dark-skinned young man with curly wheat-colored hair and the same whitish eyelashes. At this time, the girl was doing the laundry, taking the washed clothes out to dry. Just when he had time to rejoice at how warm the sun was today and everything would dry perfectly, Sasha came running. Calling the man by another name, she anxiously asked him to help her. Vincent asked the lady in fear if she hadn't left. And the girl exclaimed enthusiastically, a cart is needed. She found something incredible." The boy was hiding from the aristocrats and was sitting under the table when a girl found him. She asked His Majesty if he was here again, all alone. Looking at her, Sirius immediately lowered his gaze. He honestly admitted that he was ashamed to look her in the eyes. He spoke about the injustice he faced. Just because his father was a war hero and his mother was a saint, he was ordered to lead the army. However, his opinion still didn't bother the aristocrats, the voice of a puppet king. After all, no one would hear it. After thinking about what was said, Alexandra smiled and said that she was once a maiden who dreamed of becoming a knight. She wanted, like her father, Zakir de Arno, to go to war and lead an army, or how her mother, Bianca di Arno, wanted to protect her dear people in the name of a saint. Sirius listened attentively to Alexandra's revelation, not understanding where she was leading. But the future turned out to be a little different from what she imagined, but like her parents, she led the army. And she was able to protect the people dear to her. Doesn't that mean that her dream came true? Then she unfastened the decoration from her neck and placed it in His Majesty's hand, asking him to take it. That last moment that Sirius remembered, the cold necklace and the warm hand touching him. Alexandra asked, she had already told him, this necklace always came back to her. She will cast a spell on him so that he will definitely return to him, His Majesty. She swore that she would definitely survive and return to forever be his voice and his sword. But it was this conversation between Sirius and Alexandra that became the last. Alexandra never returned. She promised, and he screamed, begged for Alexandra to return to him, and bitter tears flowed from his eyes. Suddenly he clenched his fist, and Alexandra noticed this movement. It wasn't by chance, but as if in a dream he reached out to the one he desired and, waking up, grabbed Alexandra by the finger. Before he could even comprehend what was happening, tears began to flow treacherously from his eyes at the sight of a familiar figure. The young girl looked in amazement at the boy she had dragged from the forest. At that very moment he jumped up from his seat in order to examine this face up close. Sirius tried to cry out, to say something and call Alexandra, but a sharp pain pierced his throat. He started coughing, and the girl worriedly asked him not to try to force him to speak, as his mouth and throat were in a terrible state. It was simply unbearable pain, and His Majesty remembered the day when he heard the news of Alexandra's death. Then he drank the poison. Yes, he should have died. A chill ran through his body. The guy remembered a story he heard somewhere. They say that when a person dies, he meets God. And this God appears in the guise of the one before whom a person experiences the greatest sense of guilt. That's why at first Sirius thought that the person in front of him was not Alexandra, but a god. Having moved a chair closer to the bed, Alexandra asked if he could write, and the guy nodded. Having given him paper and a pencil, the girl asked him to write down the answers to her questions. Her name. He showed her a piece of paper with the name Sirius on it, the same name as the Crown Prince, she said. The Crown Prince, Sirius, was wary, but a year had already passed since he ascended the throne. Suddenly the girl introduced herself as Alexandra de Arno, daughter of the Duke of Arno, Zakir. Not a duchess, the prince thought in horror, but the daughter of the former Duke Zachary de Arno. Only then did he realize that everything was going somehow strangely. The god in the guise of Sasha, who stood before him, had the appearance of a girl he had never met. Suddenly she held out her necklace, which she had given to him before leaving for the war, and she asked where he got this necklace, why he had it. He pulled away. Alexandra promised to cast a spell on him so that she would definitely return to him. Now in front of him was indeed Alexandra, and he was not dead. He was simply transported somewhere to the time of her youth. "Oh my God," Vincent said, looking at the man in the cart in amazement, remembering how she brought him wild berries as a child. She talked about how beautiful and shiny they were, and also dragged frogs and moles, admiring them. He kept wondering what she would become when she grew up, and whether she had really brought this charming young man to show him. The Duke's daughter explained that he was unconscious, and without thinking twice, she brought him to Vincent's house, since it was closer to the Arno castle. Without thinking twice, the Duke's servant agreed to help carry him inside. While pulling him out of the cart, Vincent noticed how the necklace fell out of the boy's hand. He immediately called out to the miss, who reported the discovery that had fallen to the young man he had found. It was not as similar as Vincent thought. It was definitely Alexandra's necklace. That's why she demanded that he explain where he got this necklace from. Sirius was sweating with anxiety. Alexandra explained that it looked exactly like hers, but she didn't have it now. But she didn't finish the sentence and, looking up at Sirius, asked where he got it. Overcoming the pain, he screamed that it was she, Alexandra, who gave it to him. That she herself said that this necklace would always return to her, that she put a spell on it. Clutching his shirt to his chest, he shouted, "It's him, Sirius! Sirius Irion de Serkan!" But on the way out, he didn't say a word of what he so wanted to say. The boy only groaned. The damaged mucous membrane did not allow him to say a word. It was a desperate attempt. After the failed attempt, he fell silent, his hands tightly clutching the blanket and his jaw trembling traitorously. Alexandra returned to him as she had promised, but he could only shed hysterical tears. After all the memories and time they shared did not return with her. When he was little, he would cuddle up to his mother's knees and beg her not to go, not to leave him. The girl told Sirius that he, his mother, was returning to his native lands at the behest of his father. But she asked him not to forget he is the only heir, chosen by the king himself. One day, he will surely become the ruler who will protect peace on the continent. And she hugged the child tightly to herself for the last time, and it was hard for her to let him go. Sirius was always lonely. The words his mother said before she left him were a pipe dream. Then one day, a girl appeared before the little ruler, and he asked who she was. Her name was Alexandra, daughter of Duke Arno, Zakira, who would henceforth be his playmate. He gave her a contemptuous look and asked if the ducal house of Arno was completely unaware of his bad reputation. Rising from his place at the table, he walked forward to Alexandra. What the girl asked, stunned, and Sirius explained that he didn't need companions for games. From childhood, he understood that he was just an heir who could disappear at any moment. With these words, he proudly left the office. Days flew by, and one day, while sitting on equal terms with the queen, he heard rumors. Men whispered that Prince Sirius's mother had remarried to a duke in her home country. According to them, marrying off the mother of the heir to the throne is simply a disgrace. Even if the union is dissolved, it is a clear disrespect for Sirius. After all, if Sirius ascends to the throne, he could use this as a pretext to start a war. His Majesty was ordered to send an official request as soon as possible and find the rightful heir. Alexandra really didn't like that they were talking like that behind the prince's back and approached him. But only when he saw the new companion that had been set up did Sirius make a face. Sighing, he asked if she thought the weak heir to the throne was easy to exploit. He had no intention of talking to her and quickly walked away, leaving Alexandra behind. But despite his refusal, Alexandra came to him every day, at first secretly. Hiding in the bush roses with a scarf on her naked body, she watched until she was noticed. Every day, just crossing paths in the hallway after school, during training. Every day, this strange girl would just come without saying a word. How she scared him, finally giving in, Sirius shouted, noticing her on the tree. Screaming with anxiety, he asked the bird what it needed. If it had something to say, let it say it. She reminded him with an offended expression that he himself had told her that he did not want to talk to her. "What are you muttering about?" The crown prince screamed and ordered her to get off. "It's dangerous." At that moment, Alexandra stumbled and Sirius gasped in fear. His heart sank. However, Alexandra easily descended from the tree and stood before His Highness. The girl immediately explained that she was not here because he was the heir to the throne. She just wants to rejoice with him when he is happy and comfort him when he is sad. Alexandra asked the boy if she could just be near him, just to be there, but did she know what a salvation these words became for his lonely self? His childhood was filled with fear that he might disappear without a trace. All this time became the brightest in his life only thanks to her. But this man does not remember him. Sirius sadly opened his eyes to the truth. She doesn't know him, and with the understanding of this, her hysteria only intensified. Alexandra felt awkward being around. She was not the kind of Alexandra who would comfort her friend. After leaving the room, she asked Vincent what had happened that he was crying so bitterly. Perhaps, he suggested, he was simply feeling unwell and having trouble controlling his emotions. But the grandfather also did not understand what to do. This young man was too weak to be just a thief. Besides, this necklace, she gave it to him before he went on a hike. That is why Alexandra did not understand whether he really stole the necklace from him. None other than her father, Zakir de Arno, the most powerful knight in the Kingdom of Serbia. It was necessary to find out that there cannot be two absolutely identical things in this world. What if he was just deceiving them with his tears? If he really did steal the necklace from her father? Then she, as the future heir to the Duchy of Arno, will find out who he is and for what purpose he appeared here. Closer to night, Alexandra and Vincent accompanied Sirius to the second floor. The girl told him that until he recovered, he should stay in this room. The crown prince who had ascended to the throne in the past thought in surprise, looking up. She called it a room, not a closet, the bed no bigger than the sofa in the reception area. Carefully sitting him down on the bed, Alexandra said, "Of course, in such a state it is still difficult to do anything." She told him to listen carefully if he tried to harm Vincent while she was away. Then she will look for him until her death. He had turned away from her once in the past. Sirius wondered if he had had that same expression on his face then. Right now, Alexandra doesn't have that necklace, so suspicions were natural. He pressed his lip together to hold back the urge, but ended up coughing anyway. At that time, ironically, it was precisely because of the pain that was excruciating to death that he realized he was still alive. Coughing in pain, he moved away from the window, leaning against the wall, and thought that since Alexandra was still in Arno, it was about 10 years ago. And he is only 5 years old. 5 years old, that's the age when he was supposed to fall asleep alone for the first time, away from his mother. Perhaps it was because this room was not the one he had been so homesick for back then. Or maybe he was just tired from the long journey and everything that happened that day. Or because, even though she didn't know who he was, but simply because she returned to him, there was relief. Although she was stern, which made Sirius feel a little offended, he recalled, pouting. But that night he slept more soundly than ever. The Duchy of Arno, the castle work was in full swing since early morning, as was the head maid of the Arno house, Lucy. Bursting into the room and pulling back the curtains, she wished Miss Goodmorning she had no special plans today. No fencing or horse riding lessons, and she promised that on the day without classes she would wear a dress. Cooing, Lucy asked if she could imagine how she looked forward to this day every time. Today she prepared an outfit that would perfectly suit her eye color, a dress made from fabric dyed this spring. But despite all the efforts of the ladies, Alexandra did not react, lying motionless under the blanket. And then, pulling the blanket off, the maids realized that the miss had escaped, hiding behind a dummy. At that moment, Alexandra was already walking enthusiastically along the corridors of the estate. And soon she arrived to meet with the current manager of the Arno Duma, Baron Langton. Having heard the miss's story, he said that he was supposedly a boy from Castile, which meant that he was now in the house of Mr. Vincent. The manager asked her if she was sure he was from Castile. She replied that the boy was like the late Queen of Navarre, Princess of Castile. The skin was a soft tea color on the continent. Only people from Castile had this skin color. He looked ill, so she couldn't question him, but the clothes and jewelry he was wearing were expensive. Vincent said that he might be of noble birth. Since he was the previous manager of the Arno house, his observations are most likely accurate. There were hardly any Castilian nobles or rich people to be found in the area around the Duchy of Arno, Langton thought. If he was injured to the point where he could barely stand, he might have been kidnapped. In that case, he might not have been a local from Castile if the man who stole that necklace was the one who kidnapped the boy and brought him here. He could have simply been a victim, so that's why he cried so bitterly, Alexandra thought sadly. And with a heaviness in her chest, she asked the manager whether she had been too hasty in suspecting him. While the Duke is on campaign and the lady is in the capital, it is her duty to suspect anyone who is trespassing on the estate's borders, he explained. After all, she is the only heir of the House of Arno. In the future, even when she marries or passes on the title of Duke to her husband, even then she must not forget that Arno's surname would be from her. Her heart sank. Alexandra twiddled her fingers and thought, she is Arno's only heir, but she cannot become a duke. This is not a simple transfer by marriage. Her duel is faced with injustice, as if it is being taken away from her. Clutching her native necklace around her neck, Alexandra asked Langston if he could write to his father, and she said that she needed to check if this was the same necklace that she gave to her father. It was already getting dark. Vincent was taking the washed laundry out of the street. The house was gloomy and quiet. Sirius lay in bed, wrapped in a blanket. A piercing cold hung in the room in anticipation of something terrible. Sirius was sleeping peacefully, sweating, his body recovering, when suddenly there was a whistling sound of wind. And it was as if the body hanging over him called Sirius Irion not Sevran and asked if he was going to just sleep. While he sleeps, those who killed him and Alexandra are already acting again, a chilling voice whispered. Grabbing his head, he ordered him to remember why he opened his eyes again. Horror penetrated Sirius to the marrow of his bones. Hands that became like snakeskin, and a voice telling Sirius to look at a past he didn't know. And at that very moment, finding him, the frightening snake eyes dug into my memory tightly. The creature said that if he did not want to repeat death, what awaited him in the future? He couldn't speak or even scream, not only physically, but also because of the impending fear that was causing tears, which paralyzed him. As he was going upstairs, Vincent heard a crash and, looking into the boy's room, gasped. In front of him he saw Sirius with his nose in the mud and asked if he had fallen when he got up. Having woken up from a terrible dream, the boy anxiously regained his breathing. Having risen, he realized that the creature had disappeared, although it had just been at the very head of the bed. Looking at Vincent with a puzzled expression, he wondered if all of this had really been a dream, when suddenly his stomach began to rumble treacherously. The man laughed and said it was no wonder he was hungry, since he had slept for 2 whole days. He suggested that his throat was also sore and asked him to come down slowly. He would leave him some potato soup to cool. Sirius watched Vincent leave and noticed a tingling sensation on his face. The cold hand that touched Sirius was real, and the words that sounded like a spell. The one who poisoned him said the same thing. If they sent Alexandra to war to kill him, then their deaths were just a result of their calculations. He thought about the reason he had returned. If their deaths and his return to life were somehow connected, then the reason why he ended up in the current Arno is precisely what he must find out first and foremost. During training, the man told Sasha to concentrate. Her body was open, so she parried the blow well. Lady Alexandra arrived, and the squires asked if her nightly training had not been cancelled. They said that she needed to prepare to welcome her husband into the family, and he thought that was why she had stopped training altogether. True, another was inspired, which means that now he will often see the lady in outfits like on the last Feast of Saints. She was beautiful then. It's a pity, of course, that they won't see each other on the training ground, but if only she wore dresses every day. By the way, Mrs. Alexandra is already 15. If preparations for the wedding go full swing, then she will cut back on her nightly training. And what a scoundrel that is, the red-haired one has reformed. What a lucky man will become the husband of their mistress. Drenched in sweat, a weakened Sirius appeared on the horizon, accompanied by Vincent, leading a cart. He was already shaking from fatigue. There was no strength in this weak body, Alexandra called out to Vincent. She whispered, "Is he feeling better now? Is he getting better little by little?" He replied, as if moving was more beneficial for him than just lying down. Besides, he learns everything quickly, even if he is not very good at it. But he tries and in the end copes with everything. Vincent grabbed him. Thanks to him, this old man felt much better. Alexandra looked at the boy's efforts and ran up to ask if his memory had returned at least a little. The prince was surprised that Alexandra approached him and was somewhat taken aback. I wanted to exclaim joyfully, yes, it seemed he had been transported to her youth to save her. He will say it, but she still won't believe it. And besides, he doesn't have a voice yet. Sirius shook his head in response and decided it would be better to simply say that he didn't remember anything. "I see," she replied. When he couldn't explain where he got the necklace from at first, she was fiercely suspicious of him. But it seems that Alexandra then decided that the real thief attacked him and left him here to die. When he was just lying there, she didn't even notice. But he turned out to be so tall, she admitted. Alexandra's eyes lit up. "Great," she said. "They say guys grow up until they're almost 20. Now Sirius realized that for the first time he was looking at the version of Alexandra that was shorter than him. Breathing in the clean air, the young man thought, "You too will grow to 20, Alexandra." He remembered how she had laughed loudly and said that it was good, because in this way she was like her father. At that moment, Sirius was only thinking about when he, too, would be able to catch up with her in height. I became curious about how she would look at him when he became taller than her. Then, maybe, they would look at him at least a little differently. He dreamed about it so much. And now a fleeting chance presented itself when he was above the once unattainable girl. But suddenly the realization of what was happening made itself known, and blushing, he turned away, surprising miss. Sasha, Alexandra was called by the coach, asking where she was. The girl answered Sir Robert, "She is already on her way." She then told Vincent that she would come to see him later, and asked him to be careful on his way home. She ran away, back to class, and Sirius watched her. And on the way home I thought, maybe Alexandra should have become a knight, but that time she didn't become one. But now, she is still undergoing knightly training in Arno. If the future is related to whether she becomes a knight, then he should not leave this person for a single step. Vincent, Arno's former head butler, is no exaggeration to say that he is the spiritual support of the Arno family. In the near future, Alexandra will give up her long-held dream of becoming a knight. And the starting point for this will be the death of this old man. Alexandra was diligently polishing her shield from dirt after training, when suddenly the guys flew up to her. They enthusiastically asked Miss Alexandra to leave the job to them, but she told them that everything was fine. Today, it was her turn to clean the shields. They were surprised, and told the lady that she would soon have to undergo training for a lady. When asked why she needed to do such work, Alexandra remained silent. "Come on, stop it, Sir Robert," the Arno family's fencing master shouted to the squires. How many times had he said that on the training ground she was not a lady, but Squire Alexandra? I asked Tom and Jean if they had finished the work assigned to them, or if they would also make excuses on the battlefield. "Excuse me, Sir Robert," the boys cried and ran away, when suddenly Alexandra noticed familiar faces. A smile arose of its own accord from the thought that today he had come with Vincent. "Is this the same boy?" asked Teacher Robert, who found her necklace. "That's right," the student confirmed. "His name is Sirius Robert noticed that he looked unwell and asked if everything was okay with him." "Yes," the girl answered. "Vincent says that he is gradually getting better." "It's gradually getting better," Robert repeated, stunned, looking at the young man's sad state. He asked if he could be allowed to wander around the castle like this. He heard that he didn't remember anything except his name. "This is true," she confirmed, "and besides, Servan is now waging a war, led by Arno's troops. So she thought that he might be a spy sent by the enemy. So at night she would sneak out of the castle to visit him at Vincent's house. Everything was kept secret from Lucy. Making her way into the house, she went up to the second floor, where the foundling lived. At this time he was already asleep, but every night he cried, tormented by nightmares. If those tears were a lie, then this is truly an outstanding level of acting. Besides, 2 weeks ago she sent a letter about the necklace to her father. When the answer comes, everything will become clear. Sirius's fate could be decided after that, she said happily. Laughing at the girl's intelligence, Robert said that she had thought everything through so well he was proud of his student. And without hiding his pride, he said that she would certainly become a good knight. There are people who support her, so, he advised, don't give up. These words had a strong impact on Alexandra, the teacher's praise, her dream. She thanked Sir Robert. Alexandra, they say Vincent has been with her father ever since he left his homeland. When she was in her mother's womb, her father was at war, and Arno Castle was under siege. Vincent was then next to her mother. For the Duke and Duchess, he was like a father, and for her, a grandfather. When Vincent was dying, Alexandra was nearby, the girl said one day, throwing a stone into the water. The adults consoled her, saying that it was an accident, but for a long time she blamed herself. For a while she couldn't even do horse riding, which she loved so much. But now she knew, the realization that there were things that she, as a child, could not change. But 10 years ago, as punishment for failing to protect someone dear to her, she gave up what she loved most. If she had acted even a little faster then, Vincent would have been with her longer. If only she had a little more strength then. Remembering this story, Sirius went down to the old man whom he already looked after. Vincent lost his glasses while looking for them, he said. Strange, he just had the glasses in his hands. Coming closer, the silent boy took the glasses off his grandfather's head and handed them to him. Vincent gasped in surprise, saying, "Where did he put them?" This had been happening to him a lot lately. But thanks to Sirius, he wouldn't have to go up to the second floor. He said he'd be gone for a little while. And he was about to wave goodbye to the young man when suddenly he came out of the house after him. Surprised, the former castle manager Arno asked if he wanted to go with him again. He was worried that the boy was overexerting himself. The old man, of course, was pleased to have someone to chat with along the way. So they set off, and Sirius thought that Alexandra had lost Vincent due to some incident. But she didn't tell what kind of incident it was, when and where it happened. When he reached the training ground, Vincent asked him to look there. Today the young lady had a riding lesson. Sirius's eyes lit up as he saw his beloved doing what she loved. Alexandra was truly incredible. She held her horse firmly. Just one look showed how passionate she was about it. Sirius thought back to the stories he had told her, and thought how when she had dreamed of becoming a knight, she had seemed so free. He looked at her with admiration, and many thoughts were spinning in his head, as well as the incident that changed her life. He was sure that this was the reason for his return to the past, 10 years ago. Squires Tom and Jean noticed the spy passing by with Vincent and tensed up. From their looks, it seemed like they definitely had a plan or thought of doing something bad. Meanwhile, they arrived at the market. The woman complained that her son had sold the calf that they were supposed to give as payment for the land. If it was her son, then he was looking for someone to sell the calf to in order to get her money for medicine. He thought the master would take this into account. He asked her to tell the manager, Baron Langston, in more detail, and then other residents approached him. And Sirius wondered why the retired manager was walking around the estate every day. At first he couldn't understand. But following him, he began to see the light little by little, the inhabitants of the estate, consulting with Vincent about their problems. He was literally a father to the entire Arno estate. The inhabitants trusted Vincent personally, as well as their master, the Duke of Arno. They believed that their master was a reasonable person, so they could ask about everything to whom the master trusted the most. If only there had been such a man next to him in his time, the king thought sadly. Looking back, he wondered if he would then have become a trusted gentleman like Duke Arno. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by two guys, one of whom covered the mouth of the man who was already unable to speak. While Vincent was busy with the affairs of the residents, Jean dragged Sirius into an alley and left him there. Looming over the defenseless and fragile boy, he asked if he was the Castilian that Lady Alexandra had brought. The redhead, pressing, ordered him to answer honestly and asked who had sent him and whose spy he was. Spy, Sirius thought in amazement as he looked at the boys his age. Spy. Jean asked Tom if this was how he was interrogating. Of course, he assured him. His home country had sent him. That's right. Then he shouted, was it his homeland that told him to spy on the Duchy of Arno and come back? He didn't know. He was addressing Alexandra. Even if you were born and raised with Sabrain, a different skin color makes you an outsider. The sight of the boys hanging over him was frightening, as if he were back on the day of his death. But now was not the time to think about it. Vincent was left alone among these people. He was worried that this unfortunate situation would happen to him. He needed to return to Vincent. And so, having gathered his strength, he fought off Tom's grip and immediately threw it at Jean. Without wasting any precious time, he grabbed his hand and did not let go, clenching his jaws. This method was the only way to tell them something and escape, so he pushed Jean away. Sirius ran away, and Jean screamed in pain. You see, if you're innocent, explain in words why you're running away. Not listening to the screams behind him, Sirius tried to run, but his weak body failed him. He couldn't speak, which meant he couldn't explain the situation, and he was too weak to handle both of them. Tom grabbed Sirius and twisted his arm behind his back, putting him in a chokehold, not allowing him to move. Could it be, he thought in despair then, that just like then, he was again doomed to become defenseless prey? Just you wait, shouted the one whose hand he had just bitten. He will cut his tendons so that he will not run away anymore. He pulled the real sword out of its sheath and pointed it at Sirius, who couldn't even fight back. And Jean had already raised his sword over his head before striking, when Sir Robert stopped him. What is going on here? The man shouted irritably, looking around the situation. He shouted at the wayward student, asking him that pointing a sword at an unarmed man was what they had been taught in Arno, their knightly virtues. Jean cowered fearfully, either from the realization of what he had done, or from the fact that the teacher was scolding him. They should be ashamed, said Sir Robert. They did not look like his carefully trained Arno squires. And just like ordinary robbers, it hit the boys' egos hard. Only now did Tom release his hands from Sirius's neck, stopping strangling him. Shame and awkwardness in front of the teacher did their job. They realized their mistake, and Tom apologized. They did not apologize to the boy they attacked, and he looked after them in surprise. After sending the students back, Sir Robert asked Sirius if he could go. Sirius accepted the outstretched helping hand and, nodding, carefully rose to his feet. But then the illness and the unrecovered body made themselves known, alarming the man. He was neutral, but now Robert felt sorry for the young man and ashamed for the students, which is why he apologized for the rudeness of their squires. And he left without saying another word. Left alone, Sirius thought bitterly, he couldn't even escape from two. And he, like this, will be able to resist the enormous current of fate that is approaching. At this time, Alexandra was in the stable, taking care of her horse when she was approached. She looked around happily and glanced at Teacher Robert, asking him if something had happened. Coming closer, the man honestly admitted that he thought she should know what concerned Sirius. The girl looked at him in shock, not even imagining what could have happened. That same night, Alexandra snuck into Sirius's room again to check on him. Coming out of his chambers, Vincent asked his mistress if something had happened that night. She said that Sir Robert told her about what happened to Sirius. She once said that he could be a spy, and several of their squires, hearing this, attacked Sirius. And of course, he is a suspicious stranger, but perhaps he was just hurt. He was thrown into the Arno, regardless of whether he was an enemy or a spy. Because of her words, something terrible could happen to him. Alexandra, it wasn't her fault at all. It happened because he couldn't protect himself properly. But before he could come up with any solution, the situation began to develop in a direction that was worse for him. The next morning, she came and said Vincent was too old to cope with this alone. And to prevent further trouble with Sirius, she decided to personally guard both of them for a while. Carol was worried about what might happen to Vincent, and what if Alexandra got involved in something. So she asked if he was going to go somewhere again, of course, the old man answered. He seemed to be putting on his glasses as he spoke. The dam on the farmland around the river was not working properly. There was too much rain last summer, and he suggested going to see the condition of the dam that feeds the dam. So the three of them went to the river. The wooden supports of the dam had clearly become very soft. Vincent wrote down every observation he made in a notebook, and the children followed him, looking at their feet. He hadn't realized it when he looked from afar, but now he realized how strong the current was here. The water washed away the ground beneath his feet, and Sirius stumbled, almost rolling into the river. Alexandra managed to grab it and exclaimed, "Be careful! It's slippery here and the soil is weak." While lifting and holding the boy, she asked Vincent to be careful. But at that very moment, something irreparable happened. The ground seemed to disappear from under the grandfather's feet. The event that changed her life, Vincent only had time to look at the children in horror. Horror gripped both of them as they realized what had hit Vincent like a torrent. At that moment, Sirius did not know where his strength came from. Pushing Alexandra away, he started to run. "Sirius!" Alexandra screamed, seeing him dive into the water after Vincent. A second, and there was no one left on the surface of the water. "Sirius!" she screamed. "Vincent!" Finding himself in the stream, the king realized that, strangely enough, everything before his eyes was blurring. and in that moment he saw a memory she had never shared with him. That time it was she who slipped, making Vincent laugh with her fall to the ground. The only thing that didn't change was the scene of the man's feet being washed away and him falling into the river. Looking at Vincent, who was being carried away by the current, unable to do anything, Alexandra, what was she thinking then? Losing a loved one before her own eyes, she was probably the most helpless of all. Sirius seemed to now understand what her words meant. He decided that he would not let her give up and dived into the depths of the river, towards Vincent. He will not allow her to give up her dream even once, and grabbed him. However, the next moment, they were both carried away by the current, drowning under its pressure. Night had already fallen and the girl was walking along the bridge, rocking her baby. It was a quiet and peaceful night, but then, noticing something, the little girl called out to her sister. The eldest sighed heavily, realizing that she was not sleeping as the little one said, "Grandpa, Grandpa?" What the girl asked in surprise as she approached the fence. What kind of grandfather? But looking from the bridge into the river, she saw two men who had arrived at the bridge. Horror penetrated to the tips of her fingers and then she screamed, "Aunties, trouble, help!" "But there are people hanging on the bridge," she screamed anxiously, calling for help. Eyes closed from fatigue finally opened with the first rays of the sun. When Sirius woke up, he looked around and realized that he was lying in a room in Vincent's house. Pulling my aching hand out from under the blanket, I saw that the fingers on my hand were broken. He, with his broken arm, held Vincent the whole way until they pulled him out of the water. The old man was already fine. He even went for walks to the accompaniment of people's groans. Alexandra said that he didn't even get a scratch. Unlike him, he was already running and asked not to worry. When Sirius breathed a sigh of relief, Alexandra paused and asked what he was thinking. Sirius looked at her in surprise, and she cried out anxiously, reminding him that he had just started walking and suddenly jumped into the water without fear. At that moment, it was not he who remembered only his name, who should have jumped. It was she. She immediately apologized for yelling, because it wasn't him she should be angry at. She admitted that she froze with fear, and because of this, she could lose both him and Vincent. With bitterness, she asked herself more than anything, what kind of knight could such a pathetic man be? Sirius was worried. She always seemed so strong to him that he had forgotten. How kind and sensitive Alexandra really would have been if Vincent had survived. And if he died, then Alexandra would remember the boy who died saving Vincent all her life and would suffer. He couldn't speak, but he apologized, asked her to forgive him. He didn't want to offend her. Calming down, Alexandra started talking about her necklace. It was made of black pearls from the mountains of Kastilka, a birthday present from her mother's best friend, she recalled fondly. She had worn it since birth, and recently she put it on her father, hoping that he would return safely. He patted her head as he said goodbye, but the necklace always returned to her. She took out an envelope and said that while he was unconscious, a letter had arrived from his father. Her necklace was never stolen or lost, she reported, not even once. And it was strange, because she had worn it all her life and could not confuse either the shape or the feeling. But this is not her necklace. The girl didn't know who he was or where he was from, but the necklace was his, and she had no reason to take it. Finding himself so close to Alexandra, he felt embarrassed, and his heart began to beat wildly. Then she thanked Sirius with all her heart for saving Vincent, and she asked if he would forgive her for not trusting him all this time. Looking into Alexandra's eyes, he touched the necklace and thought, this is not something he could forgive or not. But this way she will feel calmer, and besides, it also originally belonged to her. Sirius nodded, agreeing to accept the apology, and Alexandra thanked him. Then she reported that he had not come to his senses for almost 4 days and was probably very hungry. But suddenly she realized something and suggested that he first go wash himself. She would help. He looked at her in horror and repeated the words in his head, "I'll help you wash." But now he was already in the bathroom. Having escorted him here, Alexandra asked if he could take off his clothes himself, and asking him to wait, she left, leaving Sirius in confusion about what it meant to wait. The lack of evidence only increased the misunderstanding, as did the confusion. Clothes, he needed to take off his clothes and wait, because it would be hard for her to help if he remained dressed. He told himself to stop imagining and calm down, took off his shirt. The maids always washed him anyway. Besides, he is now a patient with a sore arm. There is nothing shameful about that, but they were still uneasy. Suddenly there was a knock on the door and he started in alarm. The door opened and someone came in. The anxiety and confusion only grew from the slow pace. Sirius's heart was pounding wildly. Having mastered all these feelings, he turned around. His gaze met the man with whom they met again. Robert introduced himself. The shock was immense. Expectations and reality were so different. Taking off his shoes, Robert asked the cowering boy in surprise if he was okay. Sirius scolded himself for the stupid thought he had allowed himself to have, although, if you think about it, it was obvious. If rumors spread that Duke Arno's only daughter was helping a man in the baths, the scandal would be incredible. So he didn't answer. Robert patted him on the back and asked if he was feeling unwell. Maybe he could wash himself another time. Then Alexandra's words came to the mind of the former king, and he could not come to his senses for almost 4 days. And comparing this fact and the fact of the proposal, he thought that he smelled bad. And then he shook his head, as if asking Sir Robert to wash him. While pouring water from a bucket on him, the man rubbed his body and said that he saw that he was used to being looked after. Also, judging by his body, he understood that he was also trained in the art of knighthood. The man even felt a little sad that the guy didn't remember his past. But thanks to the fact that he rushed after Monsieur Vincent, their young mistress remained unharmed. The moment he jumped into the water, she rushed to the castle and told him what had happened. If it weren't for him, the lady might have suffered or something terrible would have happened. He decided that he should somehow express his gratitude. However, even if he cannot remember anything because his memory is not working, his parents and relatives are probably looking for him. But Sirius didn't even think about what was happening in the castle. Robert asked him not to overexert himself, at least for their sake. Imagine, he said, how sad his family would be if, in their desperate search for him, they ended up finding only news of his death. After the sudden death of his father and the return of the queen to her homeland, his only family was his late great-aunt, Obelia. Therefore, the lonely monarch Sirius, who ascended the throne at 14 and was killed at 15. There was simply no family to mourn his death, and tears began to flow. During the day, a subordinate approached the current manager of the Arno estate. The man reported that he brought her. It was the girl who first discovered them. As a result, the girl told the Baron how it all happened, that they got stuck under this bridge. A little more and they could have drowned, which means that they both survived because they got caught in the net. He asked if it was always installed there. No, she answered. They only installed it during floods and heavy rains. When the water in the river rises, sheep often drown. The weather comes to drink, they say. It was a pilgrim who suggested it. He stopped in the village about 10 years ago when a drowned sheep was carried away by the current and got stuck again. The village women were able to quickly pull her out, but this is the second time a person has been rescued since the net was installed. Has this ever happened before? The Baron asked in surprise, and the girl answered, that pilgrim saved one person. The survivor left the village with the pilgrim who healed him. Can you imagine? She exclaimed. He fell into the river at the very source of the Arno and was carried here by the current. Everyone said that his salvation was a real miracle. The Baron was horrified, seeming to understand something from this story, and the girl asked the gentleman what was wrong with him. The Arno family has been looking for someone for 10 years, he replied, stunned. They thought he drowned in the Arno River. Perhaps he will find it here. But at that moment, Sirius did not yet know that, thanks to saving Vincent, secrets that had sunk into the past began to surface. His arm was finally restored, which made Vincent incredibly happy, and he burst into tears of happiness. He hugged the boy tightly, just like a father, just like a grandfather, and that the truth, which should have been revealed long ago, is only now gradually beginning to emerge. Leaving Vincent's house, Alexandra ran into a knight. "It's been a while, Miss Alexandra," a man we didn't know addressed her. At that very moment, the girl's face twisted and she indignantly exclaimed, asking why him. Taking out the dagger, he said. She looked good and the man hoped that everything was okay with her. "Pierre," she said with an irritated grin, "she obviously knew this man quite well." He asked, pointing a dagger at her, if she had forgotten what to do when she met him. Sirius watched this unexpected meeting from Vincent's house. But suddenly his eyes widened in horror as he saw a man attacking her. It seemed that Alexandra managed to dodge, but it was somehow careless. She almost lost her balance. At that very moment, Sirius grabbed a beam standing near the house and rushed over the fence to help. Blow after blow, he attacked Alexandra with precision, and she had to dodge. The blow missed. The girl bent down, and at that very moment saw an opportunity to fight back. She blocked his hand, intending to twist it to her advantage. But Pierre wasn't going to give in to the little girl so easily, intending to grab her with his other hand. Pierre's excitement awoke when Alexandra let go of his hand and easily retreated. There was also a sparkle in her eyes before the battle, and she was preparing for the second round. Suddenly, the fight was broken up by Sirius running up and swiping his weapon to protect Alexandra. Pierre didn't even have time to react, concentrating on fighting only one person. And then the blow hit her right in the middle of her face. Alexandra covered her mouth in horror. Pierre's eyes sparkled from the unexpectedly strong blow. Sirius hit with special force. The strength to protect his beloved appeared again. Pierre fell to the ground. There was a crash from a falling body and a sword slipping from hands. Alexandra immediately ran to Pierre. She anxiously lifted him up and asked in a trembling voice if he was okay. He had already returned wounded. Now, looking at what was happening, the former king fell into a stupor, completely not understanding what was happening. Having recovered, the knight asked the lady who this brave young man was. Alexandra introduced Sirius to Pierre Gallion, Arno's knight and her former bodyguard, and Pierre, Sirius, calling the boy Arno's savior. Now the man realized that in front of him was the boy who jumped into the river to save Mr. Vincent. He even laughed out of surprise and said that he must have made a terrible first impression on him. As he stood up, he asked him if he had rushed at him to save their lady, surprising Sirius by approving of it. "Excellent!" exclaimed Pierre, "a true hero, who will not retreat before the threat to the lady who is destined to become mistress." He spoke enthusiastically that they would see each other often, so he asked the stranger to love and pity him. And at parting he said that he would go to the doctor, as he had planned before meeting them. Approaching the stunned Sirius, Alexandra assumed that he was probably scared. She said that Pierre was like an older brother to them. Their peers, he always taught them hand-to-hand combat in such a playful manner. And this was his way of saying hello, of checking how much stronger she had become during his absence. It's a shame. He's not even in the best shape, and she couldn't defeat him with one blow. He went to war with his father, but she heard he was sent home early because he fell from a horse and broke a bone. "By the way," she exclaimed sharply, remembering, and demanded that Sirius show his hand. Sighing tensely, she asked if everything was okay with her and was upset to realize that it was still a little swollen. She was wailing because he had just removed the splint, and Sirius liked this care. He took Alexandra's hand and ran his finger across her palm, drawing symbols. Sirius asked if he was interfering in something that wasn't his business. She looked at him in surprise. And approaching his face, he said he helped her, thinking that she was attacked. As children, she and Gaston always fought together against Pierre, and Gaston was like a brother to her. Now he was in another estate. In general, now he was exactly like Gaston, and she felt protected and thanked him. He was very touched by Alexandra's words, and a slight smile appeared on his face. And squeezing the girl's hands in his, the boy smiled brighter. Alexandra seemed mesmerized by Sirius's smile. She reached out her hand to him and said that when she looked at him, she felt like she had a new little brother. "Ah," she said joyfully, when Pierre had just ruffled his hair. She wanted that too. "Little brother," flashed through the head of the boy in love with resentment. Having tousled his hair, Alexandra thanked him for what had happened and said goodbye until tomorrow. Watching the girl go, the prince smoothed his hair. He was not the kind of person who could boast of good intuition, but he became confident that no more misfortune would happen to Vincent, which is probably why he saw that vision when he was drowning. Now that Vincent has recovered enough to walk around the estate, Alexandra will take on guarding them again. If this meant she wouldn't be able to train properly, Alexandra didn't have time. At night, he went into the tent located near the Arno castle to meet Robert. In this case, Sirius had only one choice. At the same time, Lucy was helping Alexandra dry her hair and asking if she had any training tomorrow. Tomorrow, she will definitely come early in the morning, at dawn, with the maids to help her with her outfit. So she told her not to even think about going anywhere. She was serious, and understanding this, Miss agreed, asking Lucy not to look like that. She apologized and explained that she hadn't tried to run away on purpose. Lucy asked if she was so sorry. Maybe she should start growing her hair. "Of course, short hair is easier to style, but I asked you to think about the maids who have to suffer to pin it up." And it was time to start preparing for the engagement. In the life that Alexandra lived, she was engaged immediately after All Saints' Day. When she turned 15, and a few years later in winter, she married her fiancé. She then became the Duchess of Arno, but after Vincent's death she quickly abandoned her dream of becoming a knight. And that's why she hurried with the engagement and wedding, while looking after her grandfather, thought Sirius. But now everything was different. Now she had not given up her dream of becoming a knight. so she must train every day and enlist the support of those who believe in her dream. Having met the guest in the tent, Robert asked Sirius what had happened to him in the middle of the night. This man, at their first meeting, he did not recognize him, but that day he remembered who he was. Sir Robert was the one who brought him the news of Alexandra's death on that tragic day, the knight who was by Alexandra's side until the end of the future he experienced. A mentor who teaches her knightly skills, this man will definitely be on Alexandra's side. Fast forward to the capital of Servan, Laos. Today, a man was intent on receiving a clear promise. A promise that the engagement of Lady Alexandra Arnault and his son will take place this year. Rumor has it that the lady neglected the lessons required of a bride and was still carried away by the knight's games. While he was building up his hopes, Lady Langton, the nurse of the ducal house, and Sauvier, the knight of the duchy, were losing their temper. His second son was already 16 years old. If the wedding with the lady had taken place earlier, they would already have 2 grandchildren. "Isn't that so?" the man asked, turning to the Duchess of Arnault, Bianca. "He knows perfectly well," the woman replied irritably, "that the engagement is being postponed because of Aragon. The aggressor country that violated the armistice and started the war," she explained to Count Corsica. "I asked him if he really thought that family arrangements were more important than national security. Now her husband, Zakira Arnault, leads the army of Servan in this war under the royal banner. And she asked other noble families to send reinforcements, but then the Count stopped her. As she knew, the House of Arnault had received its title thanks to the generosity of the late king, who wanted to strengthen His Majesty's position. For a family that occupies such an important political position in Servan, its history is not that long. He told Bianca d'Arnault that even if the church itself recognized them, it would be difficult for her to demand from the Pope each time that the order be sent to war. And the nobles weren't particularly eager to send reinforcements, so an alliance with an ancient family was simply necessary now. It was not only d'Arnault who was worried about the fate of his homeland, which is why he asked her to accept their offer as soon as possible. Servan owed a lot to them, the Corsican family, which had a long history. The Duchess let out an indignant sigh, but something came to her mind and, grinning, she said, "Okay." And she asked the Count how about allowing the children to meet before the engagement. She invited the Count of Corsica and his son to the Duchy of Arnault, and the Count could only smile stupidly. Emilio de Corsica, Langton was indignant and exclaimed, "You can't neglect the House of Arnault like that." At a time when the Duke cannot express his opinion, he makes demands, as if trying to intimidate the lady. "Madam, just give the order, and this Sauvier will get rid of him so that no one will know how good it is that he always proposed such solutions." But now Langton thanked Sauvier for his loyalty. Bianca was in disarray, Aragon had not attacked for 10 years, and Castile was no longer an ally. Therefore, Corsica's house was now simply irreplaceable for Servan. She did not want to create problems. But the truth is, if they want to gain the support of the nobles, they need to sort out the marriage matters first. She and her husband spent 15 years trying to prevent their daughter from having such a life. Exhaling, she said to her confidants, "They say her daughter is keen on playing knights, so let him at least look at her. Let him see what a miracle Bianca and Zakira created in this world," she said proudly. A few days later, a letter from Duchess Bianca arrived at the Arnault castle. The manager, Baron Langton, who handed it over, waited impatiently to hear what the lady would say. Alexandra reported that her mother invited the Count of Corsica and his son to the estate, saying that she must demonstrate her competence. Competence, the girl thought sadly. What exactly did her mother mean by that? They come to meet Lady Arnault in a dress, beautiful, who twirls sweetly and gracefully. Does she really want her to hide her true feelings? Langton watched the lady's experiences. He reminded her that she was supposed to go on a knightly internship in the county of Corsica with his son, Gaston. He asked her if she remembered that it was the Duchess who had first suggested this trip, and she did. She said that if she spent time with her future family, she would be able to naturally become close to the young Lord of Corsica. But then suddenly both parents abruptly abandoned this idea, and Alexandra remained in Arnault. Although she had already agreed, she still did not understand why her parents, who had always supported her choice, suddenly changed their minds. And the estate manager thought he knew the reason. At that time, Aragon declared war. When the Duchess initially offered the internship, she wanted to show them her competence. Surely, when she wrote the last letter, her feelings were the same. She must show herself as she is. Let the Count's family see who the daughter of the Iron Knight, the hero who saved the country and Saint Bianca, is. While studying, she thought about showing who the daughter of a hero and a saint is, to be herself, when suddenly she was called Sasha. This man was her father, Duke Zakira, and watching her, he realized that she had grown up well. Her stance had improved a lot, but Sasha said no. She still had a lot to learn. She respected both her mom and dad. They both, each in their own way, protected these lands and people, so she also did not want to simply hand over Arno's protection into the hands of others. She wanted to prove that she could protect this land, which her parents had so proudly guarded, with her own strength. The Duke delayed his answer in order to explain himself to his daughter as gently as possible. He told Sasha that her father hoped that the path she wanted to take was the one she wanted to take, will not bring her to the battlefield. Having seen a terrifying dream and feeling like she was in the future, Alexandra woke up abruptly. It took a long time for my breathing to calm down, and the anxiety did not go away. Tears of fear flowed on their own. In her anxiety, she grabbed the valuable thing on her neck, but she couldn't feel anything. The girl remembered that her necklace was now with her father and exhaled, calming down. It was supposed to be a day without training, so as soon as the sun rose, Lucy and the maids would burst into the room. I needed to get at least a little sleep. But the restless Lucy kept popping into her head, talking about her arrival early in the morning to help her with her outfit. And this voice did not subside, continuing to ring in Alexandra's head, taking away her entire mood. She still couldn't fall asleep, and so she decided to go out for some fresh air, and her feet led her to the training ground. But it seemed that she had been beaten to it. Sirius was working hard on the court, trying to hit the target. Alexandra asked Sir Robert why Sirius had already been on the training field since early morning. He explained that he had recently come and asked to be taught archery and fencing. His right arm had recently been broken, so it was too early for a sword, but a bow would even be useful for recovery, so he agreed. He claimed to remember nothing, but he certainly received nightly training in his homeland. He concentrates well and has a good stance. When I washed him, I noticed that he has well-developed back and shoulder muscles. Although such words are probably inappropriate in front of a lady, no, she answered. During training, she is Squire Sasha. Even yesterday afternoon he was running around the estate after Vincent. He must have been tired. Looking at the student, Robert noticed her worries about this boy. And grinning, he said that Sirius said that he didn't want to take up her time. He will protect both Vincent and himself, and she must focus on her nightly training. Maybe somewhere deep down he already feels tired, but it's his decision. Yes, and they probably should have respected him, Robert said proudly, standing up. Having shared his thoughts about this boy with the student, he went to him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Sir Robert is a good mentor. He doesn't miss even the smallest details. Sirius never realized that Alexandra had been watching his training, looking back only at sunrise. There was no one left in the place where Sasha had stood and talked with Robert. Praising the guy for his work, the man said that time was up and suggested finishing for today. Sighing heavily and shaking from fatigue in his body, he left the site today. Sir Pierre was supposed to lead the training. They say he fell from his horse and broke his bones, but why is he so cheerful? Yes, he is famous for often getting hurt and recovering quickly. Oh, it was those Jean and Tom who tormented him last time. What should he do, Sirius worried, if he ran into them again? Suddenly, a smaller hand grabbed the guy's hand, and a voice called him to follow. Here, Sirius, follow me, Alexandra said, leading the boy away from the confrontation with the squires. Tom asked when they would teach this Castian a lesson again. Jean asked if he wanted to hear from Sir Robert again that they were thugs and street hooligans. What did he say? What he wants? That bastard bit his hand. For free people to lose like that at the very beginning is a matter of pride. Or what? The Viscount's third son doesn't want to take part in such dogfights, Tom asked indignantly. It's crazy, Sirius thought tensely. He couldn't understand whether it was his heart or Alexandra's that was pounding so much, but she had a fiancé. She probably only saw him as a younger brother, but if rumors started to spread because of him, it would be awkward. Leaning towards the boy, she asked Sirius if he was okay. And as his gaze met hers, a painfully familiar scene appeared before the young man's eyes. The deceased Alexandra, the Alexandra he fell deeply in love with in his past life. Now the young girl in front of him said, Jean and Tom are not bad guys, but if they decide on something, it is difficult to convince them otherwise. It would be better, if possible, to avoid them for a while, she advised. And then she asked if he would walk a little with her. She brought him to meet her foster sister, Hebrew, Gaston, and she were the children of her wet nurse, Baroness Langton. The cute little girl looked at Sirius as Alexandra introduced him to her. Darling dear, Sirius thought, looking at Alexandra in amazement, but why suddenly the children of a wet nurse? Then the girl explained that she had asked Ivrit to come to Vincent's house every morning. Lately, he has been waking up before dawn and not leaving his bed until late at night, until he falls asleep. Sirius flinched in shock. Sasha laughed, his face clearly showing how she knew. She took his hand and said that he had been through so much since he came to this estate. Alexandra didn't know what exactly made him so nervous, but she really wanted him to find at least a little peace of mind. She lowered her gaze in embarrassment, then raised her head again and said, because thanks to him she felt much calmer. Sirius really appreciated the moments spent together and the words of gratitude. All this time they continued to hold hands, which could not fail to attract the attention of Ivrit. Having said goodbye to Alexandra at Arno's castle, Sirius finally looked at the girl, and she, as if nothing had happened, noticed that he very naturally took Sasha by the hand. He shuddered and thought Alexandra was the first to take his hand, and he unconsciously did the same. This dreamy child was too observant. Sirius needs to be more careful in the future. At that time he was driven by impatience. The voice of the man from the dream, with his cold hands, was too obvious. So he was rushing here and there in a hurry, trying to do something, and this Alexandra was noticeable even to her. Thanks to Sirius, she became much calmer, and yet it was nice to know that his efforts were noticed. Ivrit continued to nag him with an impatient look. He became even more embarrassed and almost ran away from her. Alexandra was meant to gain more influence than just becoming a knight. After all, that time, the man who demanded to send Alexander was, what does this mean? The king was frightened and indignant. He asked Count de Corsica if he was serious about proposing this now. Send Alexandra, Duchess of Arno, to the vanguard of a losing war. Even if she had received knightly training as a child, how can one think that she is capable of leading an army? Your Majesty, looking at him with a look full of threats, Emilio turned to the boy. Since his roots were in Castia, he said, he should know this well. Saint of Castia, Daniela, who waged war on the eastern continent for almost 100 years, a village girl who was not a knight. Not an aristocrat, but at the call of God she boldly rose up and put an end to the war, and Alexandra is the daughter of Saint Bianca, and also the daughter of the hero who saved the country, and the saint will lead the army, he reasoned, as if he had not thought out the plan in advance. If a woman who had no power at all were to put on armor and lead an army, will not all who take part in this war revere her as the incarnation of Saint Daniela? Did he really think it was easy for him to send his daughter-in-law to the battlefield? But he believed that God would not reject the daughter of his chosen saint. He will trust in God, who sent them Saint Daniela and Saint Bianca. Even he, without understanding anything in this, saw that it was sophistry. Truly, one of the founding fathers, a true patriot, Count de Corsica, what a clever move, his euphonious speeches supported. And they began to assure His Majesty that this was the will of the gods, and asked him to order the Duchess of Arno, Alexandra, to set out on a campaign. But would the future have changed if he had resisted? Wouldn't they have been killed by him? Even now, while he was sleeping, those who killed him and Alexandra continued to act. A hum arose in his head. No, thought the king, knowing the Count de Corsica, he would kill them by any means. He is one of those who decides in advance how to use a bride obtained in a marriage of convenience. And then he gets rid of her as soon as she fulfills his will and plans. Such is Emilio de Corsica. But all he could do now was help Alexandra become a knight, and moreover, expand her circle of supporters. And if the opportunity arises, I will certainly kill Count de Corsica with my own hands. The one who planned Sirius' death and Alexandra's death was Emilio de Corsica, so, if the opportunity arises, he must certainly kill him with his own hands. The accuracy of the arrows gradually improved, and the site of the previous fracture also healed well. Having praised the boy for his efforts in his own way, Robert told Sirius that perhaps that was enough for today. Surprised by the quick completion of the training, he pointed to the sky. Sir Robert immediately realized that he was asking why they were finishing before the sun had risen. Because the mornings are now later, Arno is in the northern part of Servan. Therefore, the deeper the autumn, the faster the days shorten, and it will become colder every day. One day, a sudden frost would hit, so he advised preparing warm clothes. Before Sirius left, he said that guests would soon arrive in Arno, so starting tomorrow, the squires would also take part in morning training. And those who bullied him would be there too, so if he felt uneasy, he would lend him a bow. It would be a good idea for him to practice alone in a place that is comfortable for him. He agreed and, walking home, thought that the guests would arrive at a property where both the lord and the hostess were absent. And this is at a time when the harvest is almost finished, and it is time to collect taxes. "Welcome, Sirius," Vincent greeted him from morning training. But then he heard Vincent ask Lady Hebrew, which meant that the Count of Corsica and his son would arrive before All Saints' Day. "Yes," the girl answered. "The Duchess invited them, and Sasha said that she would meet them instead of her." Hearing this, Sirius's heart began to pound, and his hands clenched his bow in anger. The opportunity presented itself to the king much sooner than he thought the Count of Corsica arrived in Arno. So for several days in a row, Alexandra noticed an empty target and wondered, since the target was clean, does that mean Sirius gave up his morning training? No, lately Sirius hasn't been coming to the training grounds, but has been training alone. After all, the squires began to arrive from the very morning, and hearing this, Alexandra calmed down. Sir Robert was quite surprised by the lady's reaction. Hearing that Sirius hadn't given up archery, she noticeably calmed down. "That's true," Sasha answered, and she exclaimed enthusiastically, "He is training, hoping that she will become a knight." A boy who somehow ended up in their domain, and with whom it was impossible to even really talk, and whose identity is unknown continues to support her once she realized this. Then it seemed to her as if Sirius was running next to her and pushing her firmly in the back. Although the necklace he wears is not hers, the thing she gave to her father for good luck seemed to have returned to her to give her courage. The realization of all this made my heart beat, and the significant support gave me strength. But the plan to receive Count Corsica and his son remained in force, and she asked him to take up training the riders. He exhaled humbly, rejoicing deep in his soul, and said, "The Count won't like this." "But he doesn't know what kind of person she is, as his future daughter-in-law," Alexandra answered. She asked if this wasn't the best way to show what she was capable of, and Robert smiled affirmatively. Alexandra makes it clear to her fiancé and future father-in-law what Arno's daughter is like. Autumn arrived, the leaves turned yellow, and the delegation of Count Corsica set out on their journey. Sitting with his father in the carriage, the Count's second son looked boredly out the window, listening to the clatter of the horses. He told his father that it seemed to him that they had entered Arno's lands quite a while ago, and asked how far it was to the castle. "Don't rush, Ethan," the man answered his son, "but rather look around and see how fertile the lands of Arno are. There are no other estates in all of Servan with such extensive arable land. Besides Arno, they say that forestry can even be done here. But when he marries Alexandra, these will be the lands that he will rule." The knight leading the way noticed strange dust gathering ahead, and soon they were overtaken by the invasion of the knights of the county of Arno, and it was not only the knights who were frightened by this. The people in the carriage also looked out the windows in amazement at what was happening outside. Noticing a man in the far part of the carriage, the girl asked if he was the Count of Corsica. A proud knight in shining armor and silver hair appeared before them. Smiling at her future father-in-law and his son, the girl was glad to meet them and introduced herself as Alexandra, Princess Arno. The girl's impressive performance was viewed with awe, and she explained that Arno's knights would lead them to the castle. Among the delegation members were Sir Pierre, the squires, and even Sir Robert himself. She brought an army with her, Ethan thought, looking at Alexandra with indignation, unprecedented insolence. There were indeed quite a lot of knights surrounding the carriage, when suddenly the Count opened the carriage door, to the surprised cry of his son. Unlike the boy, who was shocked by his father's actions, Alexandra greeted the guest with a smile. It seemed that the Duchess, her mother, said Emilio, had good reasons for so confidently inviting them to her domain. And then the man asked Lady Arno to accept his respect for such a warm welcome. The knights set out, escorting the guest's carriage, and Ethan looked at them with concern. Emilio asked his son casually what was bothering him so much. Ethan frowned, choosing his words, and said that they were meeting a guest, and that they themselves had brought armed horsemen. And with a hint of disgust, he asked whether it would not have been better to show hospitality rather than demonstrate force. Suddenly, Count Corsica extended his hand towards his son in a frightening and alarming gesture, and, hugging Ethan, he told him to open his eyes and look more closely. Following his father's piercing gaze, he looked out of the carriage at the knights who were holding swords and bows in their hands, but were not wearing armor. He explained that Lady Arno was not boasting about her military might. This land was now without a master, and foreigners could invade at any moment. And the young Duchess took care to ensure the guest's safety in the most reliable manner. He explained that it was not the knight who did this, but the lady herself, and removing his hands from Ethan, he returned to his place. 15 years ago, while the Duke was at the front, Arno was attacked by the rebel Jacob, the second prince of the late King Victor I, at which time Duchess Biana was pregnant with Alexandra, and being in this position, she defended her possessions, resisted the siege until her husband returned. The young lady acts in the same way as her mother. This is a manifestation of a great sense of duty. Ethan thoughtfully scratched his neck and looked out the window and said, "It seems that this daredevil was to his father's taste." "Of course he is pleased," Emilio replied, looking at Alexandra, "because she gave his son all of Arno." Upon arrival, the Earl was met by Langton and Lucy, along with other servants. Although younger than Sirius remembered, lost in the crowd, it was definitely Count Corsica. He was scared. His hand was trembling treacherously. Despite his accuracy, he had not liked hunting since childhood. And he had never had to shoot live game, and only now did he understand that killing a living creature is excruciatingly scary. Only now did he begin to think about whether he had the right to take someone's life for the sake of his desires. Suddenly, the flow of his thoughts was interrupted by Alexandra's voice calling for the young Master Corsica. Sirius immediately looked up, seeing familiar faces. He was still young, but you couldn't mistake him for anyone else. That's how Sirius described Ethan, Alexandra's husband. His heart felt like it was pierced by pain, and his hands were shaking with anger at Ethan. Where was this man when Alexandra was dragged off to war? Why didn't he protect his betrothed? Finally, Sirius calmed his anger, and the trembling in his hands finally stopped. Then he decided for sure that he had to do it and turned away, leaving the crowd. Alexandra noticed Sirius leaving, thinking that an accident was about to happen. According to his plan, everything should look as if a stray arrow had accidentally struck the guest. Kill Count Corsica 2 days later at the hunting festival. That same night, Emilio walked through the dark corridors of Arno's estate with a candle in his hands. The man, hiding his identity, greeted the honored guest in Arno, believing that the long journey had tired him. Emilio grinned and said that he had a favor to ask of him. He knew the lands of Arno well, so he asked for a favor. The matter had to be done in 2 days at the hunting festival. Later in the evening, everyone gathered in the hall for dinner. Having tasted the steak prepared by the chefs, the Count could not resist complimenting the skills of the chef Arno. He told the young Duchess how delightful it was that even in the absence of her hosts, she had managed to receive the guests. Alexandra was glad that he, the Count of Corsica, liked everything. From childhood, her parents taught her how to manage the estate so that they could leave it without fear at any time. Of course, she learned everything with joy, because one day she would become Arno's mistress. The Count of Corsica and his son looked at her in amazement after what she said, for they had other plans for the marriage. But Emilio, quickly coming to his senses, laughed and said that he would remember today for a long time. In words, he admired the princess, who was raised with such responsibility. Such a brave and smart girl who might become part of his family. But in reality, I realized how overly correct and smart she was, which was even annoying. He had already guessed from the letters he had sent him, but Duke and Duchess Arno had indeed raised the girl well. However, his daughter-in-law does not need either righteousness or intelligence. His son, Ethan, will still manage the estate. And some smart girl will only crush his spirit, so he will have to do something. The human heart is not that strong. Even if the wound is small, if it is deep enough, it will bleed again and again, turning everything into a mess. Then the day when all this happens will be a hunt. In 2 days, the Count indicated the time frame. 2 days flew by unnoticed, and the day of the hunt arrived, for which everyone was seriously preparing. Only Alexandra noticed that Ethan was not particularly excited about the upcoming hunt. "Such matters are decided by servants," the boy replied. He saw no point in organizing a military procession for this purpose. And then, turning away in embarrassment and slumping his shoulders, he said that it was somehow pathetic. The involuntary words struck a chord with Alexandra, and Ethan suddenly realized what he had said. And turning to her in embarrassment, he began to abruptly justify himself, saying that this was not what he meant. However, Alexandra laughed on the contrary. She was glad that her future husband was so kind. The words she said lit a fire in Ethan's heart, but still, it shamed him more. And it was for this reason that he left, stuttering that they would see each other later. She thought about Ethan when they first met. He had a displeased face, and she was worried. But as I continued to watch him, it seemed more and more that he was not a bad person. But she was still worried. Even if he was good, how would he react to the fact that his bride wanted to become a knight? Kicking the stone out of anxiety, I wondered if he would support me, and what if he was against me? Alexandra would like him to understand her feelings, as if an image of another young man had come into her head. She was surprised by her own thoughts and therefore kicked a pebble into the well. The realization hit her suddenly, along with embarrassment, because she had just thought like Sirius. The elder brother saw the Miss's unusual state and came up to her and asked if she was still there. The thing was that almost all the hunters had already headed into the forest. Turning her face away, she pushed Pierre in the chest and asked him to go forward, saying that she would soon catch up with them. For a moment the knight was taken aback, but then he returned to his squire and conveyed her words to him. Breathing heavily, Sasha told herself to come to her senses, reminding herself that she was now among the family with whom they were talking about an engagement. However, her heart continued to react traitorously to the thought of Sirius. Gaston, Sir Robert, they always supported her too. Sirius is not the only one, she tried to reassure herself. And when her heart finally calmed down, another unpleasant surprise awaited her. Quietly getting out of the carriage, the man pushed her in the back, deliberately making her fall into the well. But when she had already floated up from the bottom, there was no one outside, and everyone who could had gone into the forest. Looking at the light, Alexandra thought in surprise that someone had clearly pushed her. But the girl still had hope for the best. She screamed and asked if there was anyone there. She screamed that a man had fallen into a well by mistake, but suddenly she saw a rope falling towards her. However, it was not for salvation, and then Alexandra realized that this was not a mistake. Fear and horror quickly took over her thoughts. Who, why, and for what reason pushed her into the well? Her hands were shaking with fear, and in a trembling and uncertain voice, she asked if anyone. She screamed hysterically, but there was no one there. She begged at least someone to answer her. The man fell. The anxiety was simply eating me up from the inside, but it was all in vain. There wasn't a soul left on the site. Alexandra could only desperately cry for salvation until her strength left her. But fatigue began to quickly accumulate in the body from constant swimming, and the legs did not reach the bottom. She could barely hold on to the bucket, and disturbing thoughts haunted her, wondering what if she drowned. Is it really true that no one will come? It was scary. It was terribly scary. At that moment, she remembered the boy who had jumped into the icy water without hesitation. She just didn't realize how much masculinity and drive to live could be in Sirius. Suddenly, from the top of the well, a cry was heard calling for the mistress, a familiar voice filled with pain. Lord Robert looked at her in horror and shouted that he was about to lower the rope, asking her to stay closer to the wall. The rope easily lowered down, but then a strong splash of water was heard, dousing Sasha. And the next moment, the girl saw her savior in front of her. The young man's restless gaze looked at her. It was filled with both horror and love. Taking his hand, Alexandra, who was chilled to the skin, asked Sirius how he ended up here. It was becoming increasingly difficult to control emotions. Tears began to flow from my eyes again. I was finally saved. She threw herself into Sirius's arms and burst into tears, and soon the children were pulled from the bottom. Sirius could have joined the hunting party unnoticed, hidden in the carriage. But he decided that it was better for him to stay away from Arno's retinue, regardless of the outcome of the hunt. Vincent, Hebrew, Lord Robert, and Alexandra, he did not want to let down those who believed in him. The cart in which he had disappeared was finally ready to set off into the forest for hunting. Once at a safe distance, Sirius assessed the situation and emerged from his hiding place. He then planned to leave Arno as soon as he achieved his goal. He thought that if Count Corsica disappeared, then Alexandra would not have to go to war. Many obstacles will disappear, and he and Alexandra will be able to avoid death. Everything was already prepared for the implementation of the plan. All that remained was to shoot, however. His hands began to tremble treacherously for the first time he was taking someone's life, and he told himself that he just wanted to get rid of Emilio de Corsica. Suddenly a voice behind him asked the former king if killing this man would solve everything. The heart, which was already beating furiously, began to beat faster from the fear of being caught. And only after looking around did he realize that in front of him was the one he had considered a figment of his imagination. He stood before him, alive, and told Sirius de Servan to think more wisely. Even if the man disappeared, the seeds he had sown would remain. And then the man raised his hand, pointed towards the estate, and said that Alexandra was drowning in the well. There was no time to think about who he was, where he came from, and why he knew everything. Anxiety for his beloved acted as a trigger. Sirius immediately jumped up and ran to help Alexandra. He set down Sir Robert's bow, leaving the things he intended to flee with and the man behind. Alexandra was finally pulled out of the well, and many knights rushed to her aid. And then they got Sirius, who was the first to react to the trouble. Then Alexandra told Sir Robert that someone had pushed her into the well, but she had no intention of looking for the culprit because the reception of guests had to go off without a hitch. Many different thoughts were spinning in her teacher's head regarding Mrs. Decision. Leaning over, he quietly asked if she thought it was Count Corsica's doing. He, or someone else in Arno, why and for what reason is he threatening the heiress now? She asked in horror. Sniffling, she said that perhaps Count Corsica was testing Arno or trying to get her reaction. She ordered clothes to be prepared for her, and with trembling hands, she announced that she was going hunting. Hearing this, Sirius was stunned but did not stop her and was not able to stop the girl. And Alexandra, going straight to the hunt, even got a roe deer for dinner, as if nothing had happened. At parting, the Count said that despite the short period of time, he had learned a lot about Arno, and he wished Arno's heiress all the best, and Alexandra wished the Count a happy journey. As soon as her hand lay in his, he noticed a tremor and was satisfied with his method of intimidation. Pleased with this, he behaved relaxed until the end, while Sasha was tense. Corsica's carriage was already leaving Arno's domain when the Count suddenly noticed a young man in the distance. And looking closer, he met the gaze of a dark-skinned youth from the land of the Castilians. The sight of him instantly lowered Emilio's spirits, and he turned away to Ethan. Rolling his eyes and pressing a handkerchief to his mouth, as if he had smelled a terrible odor, he said, "There are Castilians here. Abomination. Let's move our attention to Laos, the capital of Servan." Duchess Arno sat next to her friend. A sick friend asked Bianca to forgive her for sleeping more than usual, which worried her a little. Realizing that she was already able to speak, Bianca asked Her Majesty how she felt. Before her, the current queen of Servana, Odelia, lay with a sickly expression. Smiling, the woman replied that she had not had such bright dreams for a long time. The saint asked if it was a happy dream. "No," answered the queen. "These were memories that she could now only see in her dreams. It happened 20 years ago. Odelia came to the grief-stricken Emilio, and trying to somehow lighten the atmosphere, she asked whether she should now call him Count Corsica. With his girlfriend's visit, the guy noticeably cheered up. He immediately came closer and hugged her. It hadn't been easy for her to make such a journey from the capital, but he was grateful that she had come. Odelia asked how she could not come when this happened to her family, if he would take her to Eloise. His mother told him that the twins were connected from birth, that they shared something special. Something that makes them brothers and sisters more than anything else. Maybe that's why it's so hard for him. He had already somehow come to terms with his father's death, he admitted as he led her into the room. But the fact that Eloise was no longer around, he took a deep breath. He still couldn't accept it. Looking at the motionless body, it seemed to him that a hole had formed in his soul that nothing could fill. If he had known then that they would part so early, he shouldn't have sent her off to marry. He should have kept her with him forever. "Yes," Odelia agreed sadly and stroked her dead friend's cheek. While Odelia was saying goodbye to Eloise, Emilio continued looking for those who killed her father and Eloise. A surviving sailor told him that they were Castilian pirates, and the princess became alarmed. Distraught, Emilio asked, "Should death be paid for with death?" "No." Remembering this time was as hard as experiencing it for the first time. A few years later, the king began negotiations for an alliance with Castile, proposing a royal marriage. Albert, her nephew, the princess recalled, and Navarra, the Castilian princess. But one of those who fiercely opposed this marriage was none other than a close friend, Emilio de Corsica. The princess approached Emilio. She understood his pain, but this union was a chance for the Castilian fleet to destroy the pirates. But Emilio didn't even intend to listen to the princess and asked if she couldn't hear her. It's not clear whether he was playing or not. Emilio said she was lucky, but he can still hear Eloise's screams. He was simply disgusted by the thought of having an heir with Castilian blood in his veins. The girl froze, now no longer knowing what her friend could have done after the loss of his family. Like a madman, his gaze was constantly suggesting danger or hysteria. He asked, "I wonder what kind of child would be born?" Of course, the princess was hurt by her friend's state of mind, but she was also upset by his approach to the solution, a mixed feeling. But politics and diplomacy aside, Odelia understood Count Corsica's feelings perfectly. If she had remained just a princess, far from the throne, she would have valued their friendship more. But the very title of Queen Odelia turned everything upside down. The queen, the only adult in the royal family of Servan, has her own responsibilities. She was supposed to guard the throne until Sirius was old enough to inherit it, and she feels very sorry for Bianca. In times of peace, she must remain in her possessions until Duke Arno returns. But regarding this, she asked Her Majesty not to worry, because even without her and her husband, their daughter was in Arno, a girl who had caught a cold after freezing in the running water of a well. She felt awkward about her cold and asked how Sirius was, if he was okay, if he was not hurt. Yes, he replied. He felt very sorry for the child, but he asked him to stay away from the castle. Despite his orders of silence, rumors have spread, and the atmosphere around Arno is not the best now. Although Sirius was the one who quickly saved the lady, in the eyes of those around him, he was not Arno's savior. Squeezing her hands, Alexandra continued her unspoken thought, and the stranger with dark skin and an unknown past. She could bear the pain, but what scared her more was how doubt and fear were eating away at her and the hearts of everyone in Arno. Robert asked Baron Langston what he thought, whether someone had poisoned Arno with anxiety poison after the hunting incident, that squire who came from other lands in the hope of undergoing knightly training. In fact, it turns out to be a spy, a common thing, but Robert seriously approached Gaspar. To be honest, he admitted that he did not think that among the knights he had raised there was anyone who could threaten their possessions. Gaspar told Robert that even if Count Corsica had someone planted in Arno, he would not act. At least until the wedding with the lady took place, but they couldn't just sit idly by. As they had discussed earlier, they needed to get Madame Alexandra out of Arno. Watching the castle from Vincent's house, Sirius wondered if everything would be okay with Alexandra. Then she trembled violently. He remembered the man's question. Would everything really be resolved if he killed only this man? Even if one person disappears, the seeds he sowed will not disappear with him. If it were not for him, he would have almost lost Alexandra. That voice, that must be the same man with the cold hands who once told him to move and search. Suddenly there were so many thoughts in his head that it was splitting, since he had agreed to help. Couldn't it be possible to make everything a little clearer? He said that even the seeds sown by Count Corsica will not disappear, which means that although he is the cause of all the troubles, but he also gained such strong allies that even his death will not change the future. Sirius thought about allies. If he had them, he would have been able to stop them when they wanted to send Alexander to the battlefield. At the same time, he remembered the despair he had experienced on the throne. Winning the hearts of the people had been too difficult for him. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Sir Robert said that it was him and that he would come in for a minute. The boy stood up in surprise. Not knowing why he had come so late, Robert was glad that he was not yet asleep. He brought him winter clothes because he thought it would be difficult for him to prepare them. He asked him to try it on now, otherwise it might be too small or the sleeves too short. Sirius nodded happily. After dressing the boy in winter clothes, Sir Robert said he thought that would be enough. I asked him if he wanted to go for a walk, get some fresh air, and at the same time check if it was okay to go outside in this outfit. Leaving Sirius's room and the second floor, they ran into Vincent. Robert told the gentleman that he would go. Sirius remained looking at the old man who had taken him into his home. And the former manager of the estate, Vincent, saved by Sirius, came closer. And as if in solidarity, silently, and the way Vincent stroked his wounded hand for a long time, for some reason seemed to him like a prayer. This gesture left behind many questions, and when Sirius left the house, Vincent said goodbye to him. No matter how parental it seemed, this behavior still made Sirius wary. Walking further and further away from the house, Robert asked Sirius if he was warm and comfortable moving. Then, having made sure that everything was in order, he led Sirius behind him. Leading the boy deeper into the forest, he handed him a bow and arrows, as if returning to their nightly training. But Sirius still couldn't understand why he suddenly told him to shoot a bow. Robert approached the tree to evaluate the result, and said that his skills had improved significantly. When he suddenly abruptly changed the subject, he found his bow and bundle on a hill near the hunting grounds, and he thoughtfully and coldly asked why he was there during the hunting festival. At that very moment, anxiety gripped Sirius. A voice in his head screamed, "They caught you! Run!" Robert continued, "This place is perfect for attacking a procession heading to the hunting grounds." He asked the young man directly who he was going to kill with this bow. Sirius clasped his trembling hands around the bow. Robert said that when the lady was 5 years old, she was kidnapped. They thought that the kidnapper drowned in the Arno River. But recently there has been evidence that he may have survived and escaped. It was in that village where he saved Mr. Vincent and ended up on the bridge with him. Did he know in advance that he would survive if he fell from that bridge and jumped into the river to win the lady's trust? From the very beginning, he found it strange that he, who had decided not to participate in the hunting festival, reported the news of the accident with the lady. Lord Robert asked Sirius if he had truly lost his memory, and the king cringed as emotions washed over him. The realization of the terrible, the inability to respond, the anger at himself, his eyes seemed to fill with tears. Sirius wondered if that was why he hadn't been able to make a single real ally all this time. Hell, even now he had absolutely no idea how to justify himself or how he would do it. Meanwhile, Robert looked at him sternly, waiting for an answer. His breathing quickened, and Sirius really wanted to convince at least Mr. Robert. Even if it was only for a short time, he thought that if his father were alive, he would be the same. My body started to sweat and tremble. My eyes turned red from the emotions and tears I was holding back. Taking awkward steps towards him, he told himself to think about how to express himself so that he would believe him. How to say that even though he acted suspiciously, as he said, he didn't want to be hated. If he didn't believe him, then he wouldn't mind dying at his hand, so he put the bow in his hand and took a step back. But if he dies here, then Alexandra's death still cannot be averted. No, not that. Sirius was once again overcome with the feeling of being drowned in a thicket of memories, just like back then on the Platinum. Only now he found himself in his room in Laos. Here he is at 5 years old, living in the present, after his mother has returned to the kingdom of Castile. This is him. He is lonely before meeting Alexandra. From the present, he wanted to always be with Alexandra. He asked the little version of himself, transferring the request to himself to save Alexandra, whom he loved, even if he disappeared from here. Tears were streaming from his eyes when he came to his senses, and in front of him was Alexandra, calling him to come with her. Sirius winced, realizing that she saw him in this state and wondered why she was here. Alexandra looked at him and, wiping away her tears, said, "What a crybaby, you don't have to cry." She was still going to take him with her, and asked him to check if there were any problems with this. Sir Robert looked at him with understanding, but still thinking about his action, squeezing his bow. Sirius was surprised but quickly perked up, realizing that they had doubted him intentionally and had come with good intentions. "You see," Pierre exclaimed, suddenly appearing, "he said that he was not like that. If this stranger had been a spy, he would have fired his bow and fled when Sir Robert scolded him. Besides, what kind of peony would have such calf-like eyes?" the knight asked, smiling. Alexandra explained that from now on, in order to obtain the title, she would travel to other lands. A general gathering took place in the temple. All the inhabitants and knights of the Arno lands will count Alexandra de Arno, the only daughter of the Duke and Duchess, mistress of Arno, even if a husband enters the family. The reason why there was talk of her being knighted before her marriage was because that this was the best way for her to take control of both the economy and the army of Arno in the future. The name Arno should come from Alexandra. This is the conviction of him, the butler of Gaspard de Langston, Sir Robert, the former strategist of Arno's army. And the previous butler, Monsieur Vincent, also informed Gaspard Miss. He was sure of this, because they always thought so if she was the rightful heir. As a knight, he will lead the army and will be able to easily fight back even if her husband's family tries to capture Arno. But in the end, the trip to other lands never happened. Maybe they both just don't want her to become a knight. But, as Lord Langston already said, if not for the invasion of Aragon, everything would have gone according to plan. But the peace treaty with Aragon was terminated after 10 years, and becoming a knight would have to participate in the war at any moment. They only wanted their only heir and daughter to avoid this fate if possible. If one cannot become an honorary knight in peacetime, then it is better to live as a noble lady. In relative safety, protected even during war, that's how it is. However, these words and her parents' decision did not please Alexandra, who dreamed of becoming a knight. However, when Sir Robert suddenly spoke up, as someone unknown pushed her from behind into the darkness, she must have understood. That she had already found herself in the middle of the battlefield was only a guess, but there were suspicions that the Corsican Count's house was behind the matter. Moreover, they reject the Duchess's request to support the front with additional troops, hiding behind a marriage promise. So is it worth continuing to deal with such a house in Corsica now that the owners of the estate are absent? She must choose her own destiny, Robert said, and asked Mrs. Alexandra what her decision was. Hesitantly, she said that from that day on she would stop her knightly training to lock herself in her room and devote herself to preparing for marriage. On All Saints' Day she goes to the capital to meet her mother, embroidery and yarn, replace the work with Hebrew. Their skills are equally terrible, so no one will suspect anything, Alexandra said. She asked them to tell Lucy to always look happy when she came into her room. Lastly, she needs people to take with her when she leaves Arno. That's why she asked men to check whether they were suitable to be her companions. So 2 were chosen: a knight who had left the battlefield due to injury, and a squire with his own dark history. When organizing the detachment, Sir Robert said that the 2 of them would escort the lady to Neustria. The man explained that his old friend lived in Neustria, and when they met him, they should tell him this. "Oh," said Pierre, "so the chess friend of Teacher Roberts he was talking about is there." Robert was embarrassed when the knight spoke so enthusiastically that he would convey everything in the best possible way. The Lord told him to be quieter and leave before dawn. However, their journey quickly came to an end due to Sirius's sore legs. Pierre told the lady that this guy's nails could no longer be saved. Pus had already begun to accumulate under them. Of course, he can walk for a few more days if forced, but the pain will be terrible. It is better to remove the nails and continue on his way. "Remove the nails!" Sasha exclaimed, and Sirius thought how anyone could say such terrible things about his precious feet. "They are already dead," the knight explained, "so removing them would be even better. Walking in such a state would be real torture." "You see, Sirius," Alexandra wanted to cheer him up. "Let's do as Pierre says." And seeing his frightened look, she said with inspiration that everything would be fine. He would definitely cope. "You drowned in the river and bravely endured a broken arm." Sirius was simply speechless, only emotions. They continued moving. It was already getting light, but Sirius still could not shake off the feeling of shame and disgrace. It wasn't that he was seriously injured, it was just some nails. Someone might think that he fell from a horse or was wounded by a sword. He knew that someone like him would hardly seem cool to Alexandra, but he didn't want to bother her with such nonsense. Having crossed the mountain, they came to a slope from which the village they were heading towards was visible. When they go down to the village, Pierre will not call her mistress, but Sasha, she could call him as before. "Yes, brother," the lady answered him. And then the knight turned to the stranger and told him to also call him brother, at least in his thoughts. Sirius was taken aback, but Pierre ran ahead, happy that in 3 days they would finally eat hot food. Sasha said that when her brother first came to their lands, he was a 15-year-old squire, and she and Gaston had just become pages, and her brother took care of them like a real older brother. And since then, Alexandra was filled with the desire to become just like him. Listening to the story, Sirius suddenly thought that in front of him was Alexandra, whom he did not know. Perhaps it was her past that made her the mischievous and witty 20-year-old Alexandra he first met. A man like Sir Pierre, whom she so wanted to be like. All this evoked warm feelings inside, but suddenly my feet began to ache and my nails began to make themselves known. Well, the body was lucky. The Castilian youth would have had his foot cut off a little more, the old woman exclaimed joyfully. What? Those who could screamed in horror, when Sirius only shuddered in fear and goosebumps ran across his body. "What nonsense!" Pierre shouted. "Why cut off a healthy leg, charlatan?" "The problem is not in the nail," the grandmother explained, "but in the fact that the flesh underneath is rotting. Several toes have already started to fester. If this is left untreated, the inflammation will spread and the foot will rot. If they only cut off the foot, that's still luck. Sometimes they have to amputate the entire leg down to the knee." So, having weighed all the pros, Pierre said what a blessing it was that they had gone down to the village before it was too late. The man turned to the knight and asked if they were hunters from the south and where they were heading. The lady of this Castilian guest wanted a snow leopard skin, so they just go north wherever their eyes lead, he replied. They just said that some big guys like him and a group of kids aged 13 to 14 came from the south. So he became curious. They didn't look like traders, and they weren't hunters like them, so he asked why they were here. So one of them rudely told me not to meddle in other people's business, threatening that he could get hurt. Well, and so, he cowered back, no longer interfering but only watching from the side. These young men were very angry, and the children who were with them looked as if they were being taken to be sold. "Slave trade," he asked, and said in the neighboring lands of Arno they punish for this severely. He advised to report to the Lord so that he would be rewarded, but his uncle said that beyond the mountains there were no longer Arno's lands. And what, Sirius thought, is the reason no one reports it, since slave trading is illegal everywhere in Servan? Slave trade, when he was little, was there any incident related to slave trade in the northern lands? Thinking about this, he perked up and looked around, wondering, by the way, where Alexandra had gone. Meanwhile, the girl, having bought a carrot, suddenly came across a familiar silhouette. And looking closely, she seemed to recognize her childhood friend in the young man with the horse. Coming out from around the corner of the building, Alexandra asked, "Gaston?" "He is Gaston," the guy looked back. And meeting the girl's gaze, he instantly recognized her as his friend, and she was convinced of her suspicions. Immediately, both of them, looking at each other in shock, exclaimed, "What are you doing here?" Gaston asked if she wasn't planning to get engaged soon. Sasha modestly looked away. And then she asked her friend if he himself should not undergo knightly training in the county of Corsica. While looking for Alexandra, Sirius overheard a conversation that turned out to be quite heated. While watching, the boy realized that Alexandra was talking to someone and wondered who he was. Lost in thought, he stood in the middle of the street, which is why he was knocked down by a man passing by. He managed to put his hands out and avoid hitting his head, and when he raised himself up, he saw a hand. A man with a large scar on his face asked for forgiveness and offered a helping hand. Looking at him, Sirius felt a strange feeling and a chill ran through his body. This man seemed familiar to Sirius for some reason, but he couldn't remember him. Finally lifting the boy from the road, the man grinned and walked on, calling Gaston. He asked if the horses were ready, and the boy, distracted from the argument, immediately grabbed the horses and replied, "Yes, I'm already on my way." He whispered to Sasha and asked her to keep the fact that she had met him here a secret. After that, Gaston left without even looking back for a second, leaving Alexandra wondering what the hell was going on. As Gaston approached the man with the scar, Sirius was able to get a better look at him. And I thought, if this is Gaston, then he is also Alexandra's foster brother, Ivrit's older brother. He continued to watch them, wondering why this man seemed familiar to him. And suddenly memories hit him hard. He had definitely seen these people in the past. The realization made him feel terrified. His breathing took a deep breath, as if he were back in childhood. And all this happened because these two were henchmen of Count Corsica. Now he was definitely convinced of this, remembering that that man was also called Gaston. For a long time he acted together with Cernova, the right hand of the Count of Corsica. If Gaston is from the Duchy of Arno and knows Alexandra, then why is he on the side of Corsica? Alexandra, who approached him, asked Sirius if he had really seen everything. She explained that this was her foster brother, whom she had told him about earlier. He is silent and cautious, so she thought he would keep it a secret that she was here. She didn't know what he was doing here. But Gaston also asked to keep his presence a secret, and Sasha asked him if he would keep his request. Agreeing, Sirius thought, if Alexandra wants this, fine. Suddenly the girl turned her gaze to his bandaged and bare feet and became touched. Coming closer, she asked almost in a whisper if he had really gone to look for her because he couldn't find her, barefoot. Looking again at his operated legs, she was worried that the wound would become infected. The main thing now was for his leg to heal quickly. She asked him not to worry about her, but to take care of himself. Sirius froze and thought for a moment and admitted that she was right. She trusted him and took him with her, but not only does he not help, he only hinders. Alexandra walked ahead, and Sirius slowly hobbled behind her, which she soon noticed. And suddenly the girl asked Sirius if it was possible that he was strong in water. With her back to him, she said that he jumped into the river to save Vincent, and that he was fine. And for her sake he jumped into the well. Sirius thought that he climbed there simply because he was the smallest. She said that even now, when she remembers how she was drowning, her hand continued to hold on to her, starting to tremble. The journey had only just begun, and if they had to cross a river or stream, she might become a burden to him and his brother. So, hitting him on the chest with her fist, Alexandra said, "Don't apologize. When she is scared, he will help her," and raising her head she asked, "Okay." In response, Sirius smiled contentedly and nodded. And suddenly Alexandra froze, looking at Sirius's smile. She was overcome by a strange and warm feeling. When Sirius smiled at her so brightly, her soul felt good. Probably because when we first met, he cried all the time. Seeing Sirius's tears every time is so painful. And now Alexandra wanted him to no longer fall asleep crying, and he always smiled. On the way, Nova turned to Gaston and asked what he was talking about with that effeminate youth. It looked like they were arguing. The guy turned cold and rushed to find an excuse and said that he had tried to sell him medicinal herbs by force. Nova told Gaston de Langston to remember to be very careful when someone spoke to him. After all, what they do some might call treason, but it's all for Servan's sake. The man told them not to forget that one wrong move, and both Arno and Langston could be destroyed. Intimidated by all these threats, the young man remembered the only ray of light. He immediately began to feel sick at the thought of what might happen to his sister if anything became known about this plan. Gaston asked Mr. Nova not to worry, promising that he would not allow them to be revealed. When noble families send their children to other estates to be trained in knightly pursuits, it is akin to entering into a marriage alliance. Simply put, it is a way to establish allied relations, because even if war breaks out between the dominions, members of the same family will not take up arms against each other. Lady Alexandra's trip to Corsica did not take place, and Gaston was poisoned alone to strengthen the ties between their houses. Bianca reassured her assistant, who was both Gaston's friend and parent. But now, with Count Corsica's actions under suspicion, Gaston has essentially become a hostage. Yvonne Langston was worried. She was afraid for her child in the hands of the enemy, and she was also angry with herself. Bianca understood what the girl must be feeling right now. But Yvonne awkwardly waved the lady away and told her that she was fine. She admitted that she had been ready for this ever since Gaston, as a child, declared that he would become a knight like his father. A warm memory from my son's childhood flashed through my head, the recent birth of Ivrit. Only, she almost prayed hopefully, Gaston had not been drawn into something too dangerous. They stayed in the village for a while, and out of boredom, Sirius helped the old woman who cured his nails. He saw Alexandra in the window, although the girl insisted that everything was fine. But after meeting Gaston, she seemed to fall into deep thought from time to time. While preparing firewood, Pierre said that they still needed to get horses. Sasha made it clear that she was here. She asked why the horses suddenly, and Pierre replied that he had made inquiries, and it seemed that they would have to pass through one place. He was talking about those suspicious characters from the south who could be slave traders. There weren't many of them, so it was better to avoid trouble. He thought that it was more important now to get horses and increase speed than to move stealthily. Whether his brother really thought that the people the herbalist was talking about were slave traders, Pierre remembered something he had heard on the front lines. In recent times, in many southern possessions, entire groups of children have often disappeared, all boys, about the same age. Well, then, as now, there have always been scoundrel parents willing to sell their own children for money. Sir Pierre's words made him remember something after the coronation, when he and Alexandra were looking through old documents. She told His Majesty that she had obtained the guard reports compiled during the Aragon invasion 10 years ago, and they said that several children had disappeared overnight in the slums, and there was speculation that they had been sold into slavery. She checked, and right after that, the poll tax in the north increased sharply. Could there be some connection here? If this is what the guard's reports were talking about, then perhaps children really were being sold north. Then why this man, Gaston? The children's minds were filled with many negative thoughts about this incident. Pierre grinned, noticing Alexandra's tension as she stacked the wood. And so he pulled her pigtail, drawing attention to himself. Sirius, watching this, became alarmed. Then the man asked his sister what was bothering her so much, and the boy listened. He explained how he came to such conclusions when she didn't like something. She always pursed her lower lip. Alexandra was amazed by her brother's insight and observation, and sighed, collecting her thoughts. And finally she admitted to her brother that she would like to consult with him. And then she asked him if maybe they should go back for Gaston. Why don't they take him? Sirius tensed up as Alexandra confessed to Sir Pierre everything connected with her meeting with Gaston. But he asked to keep their meeting a secret. Doubts wandered in the prince's head. It turns out that Sir Pierre is so reliable that Alexandra can trust him completely like this. After listening to Alexandra's full story, I answered the question asked earlier. It is impossible. He explained to Sasha that if this was indeed the case, then Gaston was most likely in an extremely difficult situation. Although they had already left the borders of Corsica, he could have simply stated that he was accompanying his knight on a trip abroad. Apparently, this is a secret. A squire has no right to disobey the order of his knight and the owner of the lands to which he is subordinated. If this was a secret that he couldn't reveal even to her, then it probably had something to do with the Corsican possessions. Simply taking Gaston away wouldn't work. Moreover, if, as a result of a careless attempt to save Gaston, her true identity is revealed, Arno himself might also get into trouble. After Pierre's words, Alexandra thought it over and reluctantly agreed that it was so. Patting his friend on the head, Pierre said, "Sasha, if she is really worried about Gaston?" He thought that they needed to get into the Neustrian lands as quickly as possible and turn to the local lord for help. Alexandra didn't like all this, but she was forced to agree. Pierre watched her mental anguish with a smile. He said the order from his superiors was to deliver the squire Sasha to Neustria, but if Duchess Alexandra of the House of Arno orders, then he will carry out this order. Alexandra was flattered by his words. Her eyes sparkled and hope for her friend's salvation appeared. However, common sense brought her to her senses and she refused. Her brother was absolutely right. She doesn't have the necessary abilities or skills, so she won't be stubborn without a reason. She suggested going to Neustria, and Pierre approved her decision with a smile. Then the knight said that he would go to his brother and ask if he could get some money for the donkey and buy a horse. Looking after her brother in surprise, Alexandra wondered since when the doctor had become an older brother to him. Walking further, Pierre looked around the corner and discovered that the place where the recent guest had been was empty. Noticing that Pierre hesitated, she approached him with gray hair and asked if something had happened. "He was just here," Pierre said with a grin, without explaining anything to Sasha. At this time, Sirius was already running away as fast as he could, replaying Alexandra's words in his head. That her brother was right, that she had neither the abilities nor the skills, so it was inappropriate to be stubborn. The way she smiled at Pierre troubled his heart, and it was strange for a teenager. After all, the place where there had never been any wounds or bruises hurt so much. Pierre exchanged the donkey for 2 horses and asked the stranger if he knew how to ride. This, Sirius thought with a grin, could easily be called his peculiarity. In fact, he had always been proud of horse riding because he and Alexandra had trained together every Wednesday for 5 years. Both her mother and she took horse riding lessons from her father, and since then she also dreamed of becoming like him, someone who brilliantly teaches horse riding. Alexandra once told him this. But now it was important for him to truthfully play the role of a stranger with memory loss. True, Pierre was surprised and told Sasha to seat this guy with her. "Oh, me?" the girl asked in surprise. "Yes," Pierre confirmed. "His horse won't be able to carry 2. And they are both small." Alexandra and Sirius met eyes, realizing that they were going on a trip together. And both were embarrassed by this fact, and the girl fell into thought. This is, of course, unexpected for her, Sirius thought. After all, Alexandra is a duchess. But to Sirius's surprise, Alexandra agreed and told her brother that she would do everything and suggested that they move on without wasting time. Surprised that she made the decision so easily, she asked Sirius if everything was okay and swore that she really was riding well. Her eyes were already burning with the desire to show off her skills. She said that she would take him to the destination without a single scratch. She came closer to him, forcing him to make a decision and agree to go together. There was nothing left to do, and then the guy thought it would be better if he immediately admitted that he knew how to ride a horse. Before leaving, Alexandra told him to hold on tighter, but he couldn't understand why. He was afraid to touch something carelessly and touch something unnecessary, and she noticed his hesitation. She immediately took his hand and placed it on her waist, causing Sirius to freeze in horror. "Everything is fine," she said joyfully to the trembling youth. "Now she is Sasha's squire." "So, are we leaving?" Pierre asked the children. "Yes, older brother," Sasha answered, and Sirius understood that he was not okay. Thanks to the horses, the journey, which should have taken a month, was reduced to about 10 days. And it took Sirius more than 10 days to get used to it. Fortunately, there were no clashes with suspicious individuals, and they safely reached the lands of Neustria, but an obstacle arose before them. It rained the whole way, the river was too swollen, but it wasn't that it was completely impossible to cross. Alexandra returned from reconnaissance. The flags visible in the distance belonged to the Neustrian army, which was camped on the western plain. There are quite a lot of them, and they are in full combat gear, so there is concern that a clash could occur. Perhaps, she suggested, they should first contact the Neustrian army and explain the situation. Then, Pierre explained, it would be necessary to say that Duchess Arno had arrived unofficially to meet with the Margrave of Neustria, and he only met with the Count of Neustria once during the war, informing him of the bad military situation. And he even conveyed a personal request from His Grace the Duke to send troops, but he flatly refused. The Duke said that he had put them in a difficult position. Then he entrusted him with the eastern border. Pursing his lips, the Margrave replied that his lordship had no need to ask for such a thing. The man proudly explained that he, as the defender of Neustria, was only fulfilling his duty. "Lord Duke, if Arno's army is defeated, then what the hell is the border? The country will instantly plunge into chaos. It seemed that the Count of Neustria was as stubborn and principled as Sir Robert. He did not know how he would react. Sir Robert must have told him to find his chess partner because he knew the character of the Count of Neustria. With such a person, you can really get yourself into unnecessary trouble, Sasha noted, but nothing can be done. Having cut off all objections at the route, the knight explained that they were crossing here. Alexandra's anxiety increased as she crossed the river, only half a day's journey to the castle of Neustria. Sirius immediately noticed Alexandra's condition. The river was narrower than the Arno River, and the current did not seem so strong. But because of the flood, the water level seemed quite high. Alexandra, he was worried about her. He remembered her words about how her memories of drowning made her hands tremble. Pierre was surprised by the horse. Even though it was small, it was fearless, and he praised it. He looked back at the children who were slowing down before crossing the river and asked Sasha what had happened. Their horse also kicked, not wanting to cross the river. Pierre asked why he was so scared. And Sirius, watching Alexandra, remembered her instructions in the past. She asked His Majesty if he knew that horses were animals with highly developed empathy. They even sense the emotions of the one holding the reins, and if the rider is afraid, then the horse will be afraid too. And now Sirius fully felt the trembling in Alexandra's body, all her fear of water. And then the prince decided that he could not kill the one who would take away Alexandra's future. I couldn't create a force for her that would become a new support. And he couldn't solve her torment. He couldn't even offer her a way out. But if Alexandra is afraid, then he could do it. Then he should be next to her and move forward together. He led the horse across the river. On the shore, Pierre ran up to him and asked the stranger if he was okay, even if he just got his feet wet and it was so cold. Sirius was shaking from the cold that penetrated his body. Alexandra got off her horse. And then she ran up to him, worried about his condition, and extended her hand to him. Taking Alexandra's hand, he wrote words on it, suggesting that they move on. They needed to get Gaston as soon as possible. The girl's eyes lit up. Sirius suggested that she hurry to meet Sir Robert's chess partner. They set out on their journey, and meanwhile in Neustria the girl fled to her lady. The girl called out to Lady Eva, and when she looked back she said that she had been outside too long. The lady replied to Blanche that she was fine. The sun was out for the first time in a long time. The days were getting shorter now. You need to enjoy the moment, and besides, for some reason it seems like a warm wind is blowing from the south. Indeed, guests from Arno arrived from the south to the north of Servan, the domain of Neustria. Pierre handed the guard a chess piece to search for his old friend Robert. He handed the horse over to the owner, as if following the instructions of Eva's partner. However, even after arriving at the castle of Neustria, Alexandra still saw trembling in Sirius's body. His companions were also concerned about his well-being after swimming in the icy river. Pierre asked if he was holding up. He changed into dry clothes, but the trembling did not stop. And in fact, Sirius was almost losing consciousness, but he understood that he couldn't just fall. It was necessary to make a good impression on Sir Robert's chess partner. However, Alexandra was very worried about her friend's health. Pretending that everything was fine, he thought, only he would be able to persuade this stubborn Count of Neustria. But then Sir Robert's partner came out to them and asked if it was she they wanted to see. And just looking at this man, Sirius was pierced by cold horror. He was ready to scream, but he couldn't from horror, and he thought why this man was here. This man was Sirius's pupil, and he lectured him on how he couldn't worry about trifles. And honestly, Sirius did not expect such a meeting, instantly shrinking. To meet in the lands of Neustria, the one whom I feared most as a child, made my legs buckle. And finally, when his fortune reached its limit, Sir Rupert's chess partner turned out to be Lady Eva, her mentor at the age of 5. She asked His Majesty what kind of ruler he wanted to be. A good sovereign is appreciated by everyone, but sometimes considered weak. But even a stern ruler will have dissatisfied subjects who will keep their anger to themselves. These are the kinds of deceptions hidden in human hearts, so it is important for a ruler to find a balance between compassion and severity. The woman asked the boy to become a ruler who would be truly loved. The person who taught him to be a kind but fair ruler, Lady Eva, was a caring but demanding mentor. However, a year after her arrival, she was executed as a spy for Aragon. After some time, Sirius came to his senses, already wrapped warmly in bed. Seeing this, his comrades immediately perked up, asked how he was, and helped him up. Looking around the habitat, he silently wondered where they were now. Understanding Sirius's confusion, Alexandra explained that this was the guest room where Lady Eva had placed them. She said that she helped them when he lost consciousness. While Pierre and Alexandra were confused, she examined the young man's condition and made a decision. She said that the main thing was for him to come to his senses and walked away, suggesting they talk later. Sirius was nervous and ready to scream in horror. Because of him, the first impression was completely unsuccessful. And while the young man was drowning in the mountain of the stand, Blanche obeyed and entered the room. She turned to the silver-haired young man and said that Lady Ava was looking for her, inviting him to come with her. Pierre stepped forward. He was watching these children, and if she needed to say something, she should say it to him. But Blanche explained that she was not his lady and that Madame Eva wished to meet his master. The whole trinity became alarmed. Sirius's heart was pounding and he wondered how she had figured out who Alexandra was. And then, with a displeased expression, she looked at the stranger who had come with Arno's people. And then Alexandra resolutely removed the hood from her head and asked to be taken to Lady Eva. The girl was confident in herself, and she asked her brother not to worry. She knew perfectly well what to do. Sirius watched the two figures walk away with concern, worried about how the negotiations would proceed. Alexandra sat tensely in front of the woman when suddenly she asked if she knew how to play chess. Eva said that since her teacher was Sir Robert, he should have taught her to play. She asked the lady how she knew who she was. "She is not a lady," the woman answered. "She could call her Eve." "It was no secret," Eva answered. He himself explained everything in their special language. Sir Robert's king was Duke Arno, and his queen was Duchess Bianca, and the knight. "This is Princess Alexandra Arno, who dreamed of a knighthood, so why did the princess come here?" And since she came in person, and the Duke and Duchess themselves were not there at the moment, it meant that the matter was urgent. Alexandra said she wanted to be knighted by the Count of Neustria as soon as possible. Now the Count of Neustria has left to lead the crackdown on bandits on the western plains, and it is unknown when he will return. She would gladly fulfill the lady's request, but first of all, the safety of Neustria. Ava asked her to be patient, but Alexandra firmly stated that she could not wait any longer. "And so I asked her, Lady Ava, to please arrange a meeting for her with the Count of Neustria." She explained that she couldn't go into detail, but she did mention her friend. Gaston, son of Baron Langston, may have become embroiled in a dangerous situation. It's not just a matter of knighting to help Gaston, she needs the Margrave's support. Arno's domain doesn't reach here, and she's just a squire. Eva asked if this was connected to human traffickers. And from Alexandra's reaction, everything became immediately clear. During war, human trafficking is common, with women and children from defeated lands often kidnapped and sold into slavery. It's not uncommon, but these cases are different. People disappear so quickly, as if they were simply swept away. There is a shortage of workers, so any reduction in population is felt very acutely, more so than in other lands. The Count immediately decided that the matter was connected with a gang of slave traders, and under the guise of hunting bandits, he led the search personally. Moreover, Sasha then asked for help in meeting the Count, but Johann de Neustria is a conservative man. He is not the type to easily reveal to a princess from another land the details of such a delicate matter as human trafficking. If she interfered, he might consider it a matter between the two realms if he learned that she had told her about Neustria's affairs. He will scold her for at least 3 days, that's the way he is, and Alexandra was overcome with sadness. She clutched the chessboard horse with trembling hands and began to wail about Gaston. Mrs. Eva understood Princess Alexandra's concerns, but for now she would have to wait. Her friend entrusted her with his beloved ward. She is responsible for him. She will also try to find out something. Alexandra could not contain her emotions and thanked Eva. By the way, there were rumors that the eldest daughter of the Count de Vauboul and Princess Arno, longtime friends, asked if they were still close. The thing is that she was also in Neustria now, and indeed she was talking about Muriel de Davobille. While Alexandra was at the negotiations, the guys were snacking on fruit. Pierre carefully peeled and cut an apple for Sirius, who was thinking that the conversation was dragging on. He said, "If you eat, sleep a little more. If he gets sick, it will be difficult to take care of him." And the former king agreed with Pierre's words. It was absolutely impossible to get sick. He understood that if he got sick, Alexandra would definitely blame herself for it. Watching Sirius become lost in thought, Pierre couldn't help but smile, and the question came to him. He asked if he liked Alexandra, and the young man's reaction was not long in coming. Sirius didn't expect Pierre or anyone else to ask him about this, and, taken by surprise, he reacted too violently. All this became the answer to the question, but Pierre could not even imagine that he doubted such a child. Well, now everything has become clear to him. He likes her. It's not just sympathy. But still, the elder asked the boy to be careful. Reminding him that Lady Alexandra's fiancé had already been chosen, Sirius became noticeably sadder. He already knew about this very well from his past life, and it brought pain. He fell in love with her immediately after they met, but Alexandra was already married then. And even when he grew up and they became almost the same height, Alexandra still saw him only as a child who needed care. Memories came flooding back to Sirius and he sighed, thinking even deeper. Now he thought about the man who indirectly helped him. Perhaps he knew something. If he can protect Alexandra's future, even just a little, if her life gets better. He dreamed of a future in which it would no longer be Ethan de Corsica who would be next to her in the future. But then his stream of thoughts was interrupted by a loud girl's scream and a man bursting into the room. The girl who burst in scared the guys quite a bit and puzzled them with her appearance in particular. But, quickly realizing that she had burst into the room of innocent people, she sweetly and awkwardly apologized for the intrusion. And then she ran away, simultaneously apologizing once again and hiding around the corner of the corridor. What bright red hair? Pierre was surprised and asked if Robert's chess friend had a daughter. It didn't seem that, as far as Sirius knew, Lady Eva had never been married and had no children before her execution. But then this strange guest returned to these two and called them to come with her, continuing to frantically search for someone. He asked the ladies to listen, although they were Madame Eva's guests. If they wandered aimlessly around the castle, they could be suspected. Besides, he noticed Sirius. This guy had just come to his senses. The girl told me to call her Lady Eva, not Madam. She searched everywhere, only this floor remained. If they don't find anything here, they will return to their room, Pierre asked, to at least say what they are looking for. And as it turned out from Muriel's short story, the heir was kidnapped while the Margrave was outside the castle. She became his mentor in the year when his mother returned to Castile, the child's kidnapper having hidden well. Pierre thoughtfully asked the kidnapper of the heir, or rather about what she looked like. Muriel said that was too much of a description, but they would understand when they saw it. Now the knight was already determined to help, to find the kidnapper faster and go to rest. They say the heir has been kidnapped, but neither this girl nor Sir Pierre are worried at all. This took Sirius by surprise. Although if something serious had happened, they would have mobilized an army to search for her and not sent just one girl like that. And so, entering one of the rooms and looking around it, the red-haired girl exclaimed, "She found it!" She immediately started shouting at her friend Christina and rushed after her. Sirius still couldn't understand the reality of what he saw, that the kidnapper was this child. "Stay there!" she shouted at Christina and told Sirius to block the door, but the little girl was faster. But the baby's abductor was unable to escape from the children who had cornered her. After all, right before leaving, Pierre caught her and said to the little one, "Welcome." Hissing like a cat, the girl screamed at the man that he had let her go. "Christina de Neustria," the redhead screamed at her, "does she even understand what she has done?" The nannies were so scared when the baby disappeared. While they were arguing, Sirius picked up the baby. And based on the girl's conversation, I realized that this baby was the Margrave's heir. She screamed that she just wanted to take her little brother to his mother, which meant that the kidnapper was the baby's sister. "Take it to your mother, Christina." Muriel indignantly mimicked her. Does she know what blasphemous words these are? The girl bluntly reminded the raging girl that her mother, Countess Neustria, had passed away. Christina pursed her lips, her face flushed with suppressed anger and tears. Unable to think of anything better to escape, she bit Pierre and ran away when he dropped her. She said there was no point in chasing after her. She thought her little brother was missing his mother's hugs. She will probably now cry in the cathedral dungeon, where the countess's coffin rests, and then return after dinner with the cooks. Christina had her own way of grieving. Pierre asked if the Countess of Neustria had died recently. She began to weaken after the birth of this child, and eventually when Lady Eva and she came to Neustria. The mother of these children, Countess Neustria, has already passed away. Looking at the Countess's child, Sirius thought, Lady Evangeline was from Neustria, and in fact, she should have been taking care of him who had lost his mother, he recalled. So did she really return to her homeland for the sake of these children, who also lost their mother? Sirius felt ashamed of himself for being jealous of children who were much younger, but he couldn't help but think about it. Did it mean that now, when he was 5, there was no one next to him? The baby was returned to the nannies. Muriel thanked the boys for their help. Thanks to them, the baby was found quickly. And then the girl asked what Pierre was doing in Neustria and how Gaston and Sasha were doing. He asked in surprise how she knew his name, and the redhead asked in surprise if he remembered her. Last year, it seems, she asked, they came to their estate with Sasha and Gaston. Muriel's appearance had changed so much that Pierre didn't even recognize her. The knight gasped, remembering that the girl was their master's daughter. But then Alexandra ran up to her friends and called out her friend's name. The girl beamed with happiness at the sudden but long-awaited meeting with a close friend. And Alexandra herself immediately ran to them, having learned that Muriel was in the castle. "Sasha also came?" she asked enthusiastically. Then she should have said so right away. But Pierre didn't know who she was until that moment. But how could he forget that face, that bright red hair? The eldest daughter of the Davobille family, childhood friends of Sasha and Gaston, Davobille, Sirius thought. The family of the Counts of Davobille, Empress Odelia told him. In the past, this was one of the most famous royal families. But by the time he ascended the throne, all members of the Davobille family had been exiled from the country. After this, the royal power weakened, and the influence of the nobility, led by the Count of Corsica, increased. Alexandra and Sirius didn't even think that she could have a connection with the Davobille family. He thought he had lost only his people, Lady Evangeline, Sir Robert's old friend. The eldest daughter of the Davobille family, Alexandra's childhood friend, and Gaston's foster brother. People connected with Arnaud disappeared from Alexandra's circle, and he forgot about them. That the reason he was here now was not for his childhood self, he became sad. The real reason he is alive now is for the future Alexandra. Noticing Sirius's condition, Alexandra came closer and asked if everything was okay with him. But before the girl had time to touch him to measure his temperature, she was beaten to it. He ran around a bit on errands, so he's not shaking like he used to, and he doesn't have a fever. After making sure that everything was okay with her friend, Alexandra said, embarrassed, "That's how it is." Now, from a distance, Muriel was able to make out the Castilian youth, and her gaze fell on Alexandra's decoration on his neck. And this fact surprised the girl, even interested her, which is why she decided to ask her friend about it later. And before Princess Arnaud left, Evangelina asked her who the boy from Castile was who had come with her. Understanding that Eva was talking about Sirius, she explained that he was found on Arnaud's lands, having lost all memories except his name. Therefore, they do not know his lineage, but assumed that he was from a fairly wealthy family. After Princess Arnaud left, Evangeline thought about their first meeting. He said he had lost his memory, but the expression on his face when he saw her was clearly surprised and a little scared. A boy with an unknown past, found without memory, Sirius that is. So instead of deliberately meeting with the Count of Neustria now, Lady Eva said she would think of a way herself. She asked to wait, and it wasn't Arnaud, so all that was left was to act passively. The feeling of helplessness weighed on her more than ever, and her emotions became impossible to contain. Hiding her face from her comrades, the princess sobbed and exclaimed how long she would have to wait. While they're sitting here chilling, Gaston might be involved in something bad. Alexandra was so depressed that she couldn't do anything right now. Pierre went to console her, and Sirius also wanted to come over, but something stopped him halfway. Pierre pushed him away, and the guy froze, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. And trying to calm down quickly before the meeting, she asked who it was at such an hour. As it later became known, Lady Evangelina ordered that Alexandra be moved to another room. In response to her question, Blanche asked if this wasn't self-evident. It is absurd for Princess Arnaud to remain in a cramped room with her guards. Mistress Eva said that if she didn't mind, she could stay in the same room with Lady Davobille, and Sasha agreed. After that, she told her brother that she was going, and wished Sirius good night. They saw Alexandra off, and as soon as the girls were out of sight, Pierre turned to Sirius. He asked him not to be offended by what happened earlier. He probably just wanted to comfort her. But he advised leaving it only as a feeling of admiration. He thought there was no need to say who would suffer. If he continued to cultivate this feeling, looking at Pierre, Sirius turned away, pursing his lips. He already knew well what it was to suffer from overwhelming admiration, Sir Pierre, he answered mentally. Staying in the room with his friend, Alexander still couldn't let go of his worries. Muriel asked Sasha what she was unhappy about, since she was right next to her. Of course, she exclaimed, to meet her, Muriel, and to live with her in the same room is so wonderful. Finally, the girl was satisfied with her answer, and also in agreement. She asked Muriel why she was in the Neustrian realm, and she replied that she had come following Lady Eva. Evangeline was a good person to follow, a person from whom one could learn something. And she has a lot of information about Aragon and the papacy. Mother said that wherever Lady Eva goes, follow her and learn. It would have been even better if Gaston had been here too. The three of them always chatted all night long, and their nanny was with them too. She asked if everything was well with Gaston. In his last letter, she read that he had gone to the lands of Corsica. And Hebrew must have grown a lot too. She missed everyone, Muriel admitted. But Alexander was burdened by the thought of whether he should tell Muriel about Gaston. That Gaston might be involved in bad things and she can't do anything about it. But then Muriel herself switched to another topic and exclaimed, asking, "By the way, what happened?" This guy, he was wearing her necklace, the black pearls that her mother had given the Duchess when she was born. Exactly, Sasha exclaimed and asked. Even she, Muriel, thought it was her necklace, and she told how it all happened. So Sirius saved Vincent, and her, when she fell into the well, incredibly, she concluded after listening. "You know," she continued, "when they were riding here, she had to ride on the same horse with Sirius. She was in such a hurry to get to Neustria that she didn't hesitate to put Sirius behind her. Until that moment, she thought of Sirius as a younger brother, like Gaston, and didn't think anything of it. But when they had to cross the river, Sirius noticed that she was afraid of water. Then he jumped into the water without hesitation and led her horse, and she had a strange feeling. Sirius is like a younger brother whom she should take care of, so doesn't she look too helpless and stupid now? It was a little unpleasant for her," Muriel said. "Even if it had been Gaston in his place, he would have also readily jumped into the water for her." She asked if she felt uncomfortable appearing like this in front of Gaston, and Sasha was taken aback. And her friend asked with a thoughtful grin, so she didn't want to look like that in front of Sirius. If she really considered him just a junior, like Gaston, she would feel the same way. The final question that came out of her mouth took Sasha by surprise. Was Sirius really just a little brother to her? Memories of Sirius flashed through her mind, his warm smile causing a storm. His courageous nature, sensitivity to her condition, and readiness to rush to help no matter what. Clutching the sheet with her fingers and out of nervousness, Alexandra said, "No, he's different." Now she realized her feelings and asked Muriel what to do. It seemed she loved Sirius. Because the Count of Neustria, on whom everything depended, was not there, they were stuck in Neustria. As he set out on his journey, he secretly hoped that they would easily achieve what they wanted. That Alexandra will easily accomplish the feat, receive the title, and immediately return to Arno, however. Evangeline said that Princess Arno had better stop dressing up as a man within the castle walls. After all, seeing the Duchess dressed as a man stopping in Muriel's room is. For others, it doesn't look good. She will give her one of the dresses she wore in her youth. And she asked Alexandra if she understood what she was talking about. To be honest, Lady Evangeline was annoying Alexandra with her persistence. But now she understood why Lady Eva, Sir Robert's friend, Lady Eva was just the spitting image of the teacher. They say she came from the capital, where she was the governess of His Highness the Crown Prince Sirius, which may be why she had such an aura. Sirius didn't think it was because of that. She was always like that. But his brother's sociability amazed Sasha. He found out this information, although they had only been in Neustria for one day, when suddenly Sasha turned to Sirius. The guy immediately looked back at Alexandra and smiled sweetly, and Alexandra succumbed to his charms. Wow. After they talked about it with Muriel last night, now Sirius seemed so sweet to her. While she was thinking, the guy was waiting for her to finish what she called him for. But, embarrassed, Alexandra jumped up from her seat and stammered that she would go and change her clothes, as Lady Eva had said. She needed to escape from her brothers to hide her sympathy and flushed face. Perhaps it was just Sirius's feelings, but she looked depressed, and he, who wanted to be her guide, felt like a broken compass. Later in the evening, all the inhabitants of the Neustria castle gathered in the hall for dinner. Sirius was eating peacefully when suddenly a girl approached him and asked if everything was okay. She noticed how skillfully he used cutlery. He must have received a good upbringing. She taught him this same upbringing, and very harshly at that, he thought resentfully. While finishing a piece of steak, Pierre asked why Madame Alexandra was taking so long to come. Evangelina watched with affection her ward, the Duchess of Neustria's daughter. Without any table manners, Christina simply ate with her hands, trying to eat everything faster. Lady Eva carefully asked Christina to eat more slowly, otherwise she would choke. But the girl rudely rejected the woman's help and shouted at her not to pretend to be her mother. Lady Eva is such a good person, and such a reaction, although she of course did not teach him so kindly. Seeing someone, Sir Pierre immediately got up from the table and went to meet them. Looking after the night, Sirius finally understood who Pierre had gone to so hastily. Alexandra finally arrived in the dining room in a beautiful dress. Refreshed, sparklingly beautiful, the complete opposite of the image she had for so long. Pierre bowed to Princess Alexandra and asked his mistress to allow him to accompany her. And at that moment Sirius suddenly remembered the past. He was overcome again by the feeling that she was so close, but could never touch him. Feeling as if an invisible wall separated them, Pierre carefully seated both ladies. Although there was no age difference between them this time, it seemed to him that the distance between them had not disappeared. However, contrary to Sirius's thoughts, Alexandra looked for her friend, but could not find him. Then she asked Muriel if she was the only one who couldn't see Sirius, but there he was, her friend said, just staring at her. She pointed to the table where the young man had just been standing, but there was no one there anymore. As Sirius ran away, he thought that he couldn't look Alexandra in the face now if he remained sitting there. Then all his miserable thoughts were reflected on his face. He could barely hold back his tears as he quickly went out into the street. All the time at the table, he envied the whims of a child who was younger than him and who had also lost his parents. I envied Sir Pierre for holding Alexandra's hand so easily. It was such a good dinner. The first time in a long time that I had had proper food. Meeting with a friend, but even if he had such a sour face, Alexandra must have been worried about him. And even though he couldn't help her in any way now, he didn't want to spoil Alexandra's mood. Suddenly, his disturbing thoughts were interrupted by someone's frightening singing in the empty chapel. Trembling with fear, he looked around, hoping that he would not see anything frightening and that it was just a church hymn. But despite all his fears, Sirius saw the daughter of the Count of Neustria in the church. Singing a lullaby, the girl plunged into the church building, but almost dropped the candle from fright. In the pitch darkness, a statue startled her, and she continued on her way, frightened, humming, while Sirius followed her carefully. The daughter of the Count of Neustria, she is scared herself, but she still goes down to the crypt. There, where the coffin of her late mother, the Countess, stands, she looks the same age as Ivrit. Sirius even felt ashamed that deep down he was jealous of this girl. It was unlikely that anyone else would descend into the tomb so late at night, so he remained to wait. After all, he had to keep an eye on her so that nothing happened, the young man decided. Crying broke through the quiet muttering, and even though Sirius knew who was there, he still felt uneasy. For her father, who had no other relatives left, protecting the borders and lands of Neustria was probably the most important thing. With no one to share her grief with, the girl copes with loneliness as best she can. It seemed that in this castle he was the only one who truly understood what was in her soul. Lost in thought, Sirius suddenly noticed that neither crying nor singing could be heard anymore. Suddenly he was frightened by Lady Evangeline's sharp and firm question about what he was doing here. But when Sirius turned around, Eva said that she was already scared, thinking that there was a suspicious guy walking around. And having come to his senses, Sirius frowned and thought, what brought Lady Eva here? It felt like his teacher from the past was asking herself exactly the same question. Blanche carried the baby out of the tomb and, watching, Sirius realized that she had fallen silent because she had dozed off. Eva asked if he was sitting there to watch over Christina, how attentive he was. Sirius was pleased to receive a compliment. If there was any concern in it, it was only because of that he adopted this from kind Alexandra, who was always there when he was left alone. Evangelina sighed and said, "It seems Christina thinks that she will take the place of the Countess." A strange woman, who appeared out of nowhere, suddenly begins to take care of her like a mother, and naturally Christina is worried. Wait, did the Count have an affair with Lady Eva? So that's why she rushed to Neustria as soon as the Countess was gone. Embarrassed, Evangelina said that he was funny and easy to read. It was all on his face. But then she took a closer look at the appearance of the young man of unknown origin, and coming closer she said, "Amazingly, maybe it's because they are both from Castile. When that boy grows up, he will certainly become a copy of him," she said suspiciously. And Sirius, dumbfounded, thought with fright that she was talking about his childhood. I thought she would hardly understand that they were one and the same person, but with Lady Eva you have to keep your eyes open. That boy also lost his father early, and recently his mother died too, so she had to take him on. He was afraid of her, which is why they couldn't get close, which means he thought she understood that he was afraid of her. She said that Alexandra's mother, the Duchess of Arno, St. Bianca, would now look after him. Suddenly he became an observer of this scene again. Alexandra's mother was next to him. Her daughter's life was also under threat on their own land, the Duchess admitted. To be honest, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to find a good match in Servan now, but if that's the case, then she will never get involved with the family of Count Corsica. The engagement had not yet been sealed, so she would stay in the capital and try to prevent it. So she asked Lady Evangeline not to worry about His Highness Sirius and to go back to Neustria. Duchess Bianca heard about this. They say the Countess of Neustria died. Those who trusted her, a native of an enemy country, and entrusted her with this task, were the royal family of Servan. Now Her Majesty is unwell, and she did not dare to abandon the task entrusted to her, to raise His Highness Sirius to be a worthy heir to the throne, due to personal experiences. Briefly taken aback, Bianca asked Evangeline if it was her duty to serve the prosperity of the Servan house. Evangeline was surprised, as if she understood what Duchess Arno was getting at, but didn't want to be sarcastic with Lady Eve. But it seemed to her that she was serving for the good of the Servan house for the sake of someone dear to her, that her goal is to build a country where the child of the one she loves most in the world can grow up happy and healthy. And the fact that she protects the lands of the Margrave is not only personal. The Count of Neustria, left alone, will have a hard time keeping track of his possessions. Isn't the bet on Servan's stability what's best for this child and Her Majesty? It turns out that what made him be a merciful and strict ruler was the love of Lady Eva, thinking about her beloved man. Thoughts kept Sirius from sleeping that night, and, emerging from his memories, he opened his eyes. After checking that Sir Pierre was asleep, Sirius got out of bed to live for the one you love. Walking out onto the castle wall and looking at the starry sky, Sirius thought that he never thought he would understand Lady Eva. The future changes as and when this gift of seeing other places and other times is triggered. If he knew how to use this power wisely, it would help him find the right path. He didn't have time to understand the essence of this ability and how to use it, or to judge whether Alexandra's future would change for the better. So out of nowhere, this mysterious man appeared, and he called Sirius de Servan to come down so that he could show him the way he should go. That night, Alexandra also slept poorly. All her thoughts were occupied with Sirius, her feelings, and his attitude towards her. She thought about today's dinner. Could Sirius really have been avoiding her then? Come to think of it, there had been a strange distance between her and Sirius all this time. Sirius is kind, so he couldn't say anything. Maybe he was just dragged around all this time. As she left the room for some fresh air, she thought about what Muriel had said last night. Feelings have appeared. Nothing can be done about it, she told Sasha, but it seems it's time to draw the line. But, she said enthusiastically, apparently Sirius loved her too. No, Alexandra denied, embarrassed and convulsively. It can't be Sirius. Sirius is a kind boy who, even when he experienced horror, lost the power of speech. Even when suspicion fell on him because of this, he did not show that he was offended. The fact that Sirius helps her is because he considers her his savior. Seeing her friend drowning in feelings, doubts, and worries, Muriel called out to her. She reminded Sasha that she was the only princess of Arno. Even if the engagement with the House of Corsica falls through, sooner or later she will have to marry someone from an influential family. She was too important to waste her feelings on a boy of unknown origin. She asked her not to forget about it, and Alexandra froze, thinking about it. However, in the middle of the night she heard someone's hurried footsteps rushing nearby, and the next moment she saw Sirius, as if anxiously rushing somewhere away from the castle. She walked down the stairs worriedly and wondered where he was going on such a night. The man who always appeared at important moments and showed the way was now rushing towards him. Running out of the castle, he looked around and found him turning the corner. He wanted to ask him so much. Who is he really? Why was he given this ability? How much does he know about the future, and why is he leading it? What if he's not actually leading it, but just playing with it? But if this is not a game, if everything he does and says is true for the sake of saving Alexandra, then why him? Left alone with each other, the guys looked at each other appraisingly, and then an unknown person approached. He said he still couldn't use it freely, the eye that sees all times and all events. With an eye that sees all times and all events, he repeated in surprise. It is a privilege that no saint called to this earth has ever received. The ability to see all times and all events is a gift that God gave only to them, the sorcerers. Wizards, what does this mean? Asked Sirius. They are not saints, he answered, but they are also chosen to fulfill the will of God, with this eye that sees all times and events. They must lead the world to the most ideal future that God desires. So he, Sirius de Servan, must stop the worst future that God does not want, the one where Alexandra dies. The worst future, he repeated in horror at the same moment, grabbing him by the shoulder, begging him to tell him how to use this ability correctly. What should he do to prevent Alexandra's death? In the present, Sirius is not a man at all, and only Alexandra's hands on his cheeks brought him to his senses. He looked at her, stunned and confused, and tried to catch his breath. The girl, worried about him, asked embarrassedly if he had come to his senses. Sirius immediately grabbed her by the shoulders tighter. Assessing the reality of what he saw, she explained that he was standing alone, staring into space. Loosening his grip, he looked around, thinking, he's alone. That man. Which means the others can't see him. Sirius continued to hold on to Alexandra, and when he realized what he was doing, he removed his hands in embarrassment. A rather awkward situation arose. But Alexandra was the first to come to her senses, and asked Sirius if he was going somewhere. And looking into his eyes, she extended her hand for the boy to answer. "I just wanted to get some air," Sirius replied, "but everything's fine now." So he offered her to go back, and holding her hand close to him, he let go. In fact, she was a little worried that Sirius might regain his memory. And then he decided to secretly leave her, or so she thought, seeing him running away from the palace. If Sirius remembers everything and returns to his family, this will be a joyful event. Because she loved him, she was afraid of change and wanted to keep him close, even though she knew how mean it was. Lost in thought, she didn't notice how Sirius stopped abruptly and crashed into him. "Sirius!" Alexandra called out to him in surprise, wondering why he had suddenly stopped. But then she saw the same person whom Sirius had noticed, and at that very moment rage filled her mind. It was the same man who was with Gaston, so was Gaston really here in this village? Pushing Sirius away, Alexandra was ready to rush in pursuit of the man with a scar on his face. But the sensible Sirius held her back, squeezing her tightly around the waist. Sasha kicked. She whispered indignantly to Sirius that they needed to follow him. Maybe they would find out what Gaston was up to. Usually Alexandra was reasonable and calm, but on this day, due to the long wait, everything was different. However, he could not let her go. The right hand of the Count of Corsica, Lord Nova, would become a knight of considerable skill in the future. And so, recklessly rushing after him, he asked Alexandra to return to her usual caution. Thanks to Sirius, the girl really came to her senses and finally thought rationally. Exhaling, she apologized to Sirius for almost running out headlong, and looking back at the man, she suggested that Sirius carefully follow him. At the meeting place of the Count of Corsica's henchmen, another guy was waiting for Lord Nova. "Welcome, Lord Nova," he greeted him. "Frederick," he answered and asked about the children. "Everyone who arrived at the appointed time is already in the carriage," Frederick answered. Nova went first with the children, and as usual, he was assigned to the cargo wagon that would follow them half a season later. Having peeked at the situation from the side, they realized that there were definitely children in the carriage. Then she thanked Sirius for stopping her then, but still. She said that she had to go after this man. She assumed that maybe that Lord Nova and Gaston were together. At least she would know where Gaston was. Alexandra could not simply sit helplessly in Neustria and wait with folded arms. Grabbing her hand and stopping her, Sirius asked Alexandra to be more calm. He reminded her of the original purpose of her visit to Neustria. She had come to receive a knighthood. She didn't want to become a knight in order to sit in a castle and wait at times like these. And now she was confident in herself to be the first to rush forward and protect her beloved family. Leaving Sirius behind, she ran to Frederick's carriage, which was supposed to follow Nova. She carefully crept up from behind, opened the curtains and tried to climb into the carriage. But suddenly it became unexpectedly easy to climb inside, and she looked back anxiously, where she met Sirius, who was helping the lady get into the carriage, lifting her in his arms. And thanks to the girl's help, he got into the cart after her. She said he didn't have to go with her. If it was really about the slave trade, he would be in danger too. But suddenly the cart rocked and the children realized that he had started moving. But during this journey, Sirius realized one thing: loving someone makes you stronger. He took her hand, as if telling his beloved that he would be by her side on this journey. Just as she can become strong for her family, so he must become stronger for her. Waking up at dawn, Pierre first of all felt the empty space nearby, and still sleepy, he asked why it was so cold. Having gathered himself and left the room, he met Lady Muriel, wishing her good morning. She looked alarmed and told Sir Pierre that she had just been going to look for him. She asked if he had seen Sasha. Pierre replied that she had not come into their room, and he asked if she shouldn't be with the lady. Then Muriel replied, "She woke up in the morning. She was not there. She thought she might be with Lady Eve." Pierre had nothing to say, and his morning had not started off well from the start, so together they went to the lady. Entering the office together, they saw only two ladies there. Blanche brought the scarf that the guard had discovered in the morning. She then told that at dawn, two of the ladies' guests left the castle, and what one of them was wearing was found on the road. After examining the item, Evangeline said that she gave it to Sirius when he lost consciousness. Then I asked about the signs of the second one. Luckily, the guard had seen the face at yesterday's reception, so he remembered it. It was a girl dressed in men's clothing, similar to Princess Arno. Realizing that something was fishy here, Lady Evangeline turned to Sir Pierre, who had arrived, and she asked a question, comparable in horror to an announcement of the death of a loved one. Where is his owner now?